This is Audible.
Hold Me Close, Bridgewater County, Book 4, written by Vanessa Vale, narrated by Kylie Stewart. Chapter 1. Rachel. Even though I was born and raised in Montana, I never really understood the appeal of the rodeo circuit. The animals, wrangling them, tying little calves' ankles up as fast as possible. But as I watched this cowboy riding the massive bull, the muscles of his chest rippling beneath the fabric of his shirt, as his arms bulged beneath the strained material, I finally got it. He rocked back and forth, balancing and going with the jerky motions of the angry beast, arm flung up over his head. Oh, Lordy, I got it. I gasped when the bull kicked out its hind legs, not because I was scared for the cowboy, but because of the way his thighs contracted beneath those jeans to stay on its back. Jeans, I might add, that left little to the imagination. The whole thing was stupid, plain stupid. Stay on a bull for 8 seconds, but somehow every one of my hot buttons was pushed, watching the testosterone fest. Here's a napkin. My sister's voice cut into my open-mouthed gawking. I turned to face Emmy, who somehow still managed to look sleek and stylish, in a jean skirt and flowery top, even when 8 months pregnant. She held out one of the napkins she'd nabbed when she'd gone to get herself an ice cream cone. I frowned at it. What's that for? Emmy grinned. You've got a little drool there. My frown turned into a scowl. I was not drooling. I turned away and subtly swiped the corners of my mouth just in case. Whatever you say, sis. I didn't have to see her to know she was rolling her eyes in my direction. Even though she was younger, Emmy had the air of a know-it-all older sister. But then she was the one who was happily married with a baby on the way, while I was still deeply rooted in spinsterhood with no end in sight. Somehow, this seemed to give her an advantage that negated my 2-year seniority. Emmy had a Bridgewater marriage, which meant she was the lucky bride of 2 doting, protective men. Like all my siblings, she had a big heart and a good head on her shoulders, and I wished only the best for her, except for now. As she licked her ice cream, looking impossibly smug, I wondered for the millionth time how my bratty little sister managed to snag not 1 but 2 men, when I hadn't managed to land a second date in more months than I'd cared to admit. It was fine and all if it were just Emmy having a baby, but I was one of 6. All 5 of my siblings were married with kids, or in Emmy's case with a kid on the way. 2 of my brothers were in Bridgewater marriages as well, but the rest had followed in my parents' footsteps and gone the traditional route. 1 man, 1 woman, and everyone had found their perfect someone or perfect someones early. Emmy was only 24, and my brother Zach had married at 21. My parents always used to say, when you know, you know. Well, I'd yet to know. Honest to God, I didn't care what kind of relationship I found myself in, traditional, Bridgewater, or other. I just wanted to be in one. Not that I was desperate for a man. No, I didn't sit around the house pining for one. Besides, I didn't just want any man. I wanted the right man, or men. I dated, but so far there hadn't been any spark. Not anyone that I'd wanted to go out with past a second date. So I'd sort of given up. Not that I'd ever been on the prowl, but I wasn't going to bars with my girlfriends on Friday nights looking for hookups. Well, I'd never gone looking for a hookup, but I'd gone looking, and it hadn't worked. Because of this, I wasn't exactly boy crazy, but I definitely was baby crazy. I wasn't old by any means, but I thought that by 26 I'd be in the same boat as the rest of my family. If not married with kids, at least well on my way. Heck, Emmy was having a baby before me. Yeah, that hurt. Not that I'd ever tell her or let it show. It was my problem, not hers. It wasn't her fault she found 2 guys who loved her and wanted to make a life with her. A family. I'd had it all planned out. College, grad school, then start a family. Sure, I was young, but I wanted a big brood, and that meant starting early. But somehow, at some point, my life plan had gotten derailed. I stifled a sigh as I turned to watch the haughty cowboy pick up his hat from the dirt ring, lift it and wave it in the air. The crowd cheered and clapped as he walked out through the open rail. Even the back of him looked damn good in the chaps and snug jeans. They were well worn and molded his butt just right. Damn it. Emmy nudged me with her hip, caught me ogling again. You should go back there. Introduce yourself. I looked at her as if she suggested I climb on the back of the bull and go for a ride. Introduce myself? To the bull rider. I couldn't do that. Emmy glanced at me. We looked similar with our light brown hair and hazel eyes, but she was several inches shorter. Why not? I shrugged. Because I couldn't. I wasn't like Emmy. She had no problem going up to strange men and flirting. Well, she hadn't before she'd fallen for Rick and Kevin 2 years ago. They were alpha males through and through, and they were the only men she flirted with now. The bowling ball beneath her shirt proved that. But that wasn't me. I'd never been great at flirting, and super attractive men tended to make me nervous. No, I always turned into a stuttering idiot. The reason behind my single status wasn't such a mystery after all. You're intimidated, aren't you? Emmy continued. God, she was way too amused by my discomfort. Some things never change. By that guy? I pointed in the direction he'd gone. Absolutely. You saw him. He's insanely hot. Of course I'm intimidated. I didn't bother denying it. We both knew I was the reserved one in our family. That was the way I put it. Emmy and my other sisters just called me a prude. What they didn't know, what I'd never told them, was that my wariness around hot men, well, practically all men, wasn't just because they intimidated me. It went deeper than that. I knew that if they got close, they'd want to get close. I'd had exactly one attempt at sex, and it had been awful, scary. Back in college, there'd been a guy, a good guy, or so I thought. On our third date, he'd assumed we would be doing more than just kissing. He'd assumed wrong. I hadn't been ready to take it to the next level, but he wouldn't listen. His hands had been everywhere despite my protests and my feeble attempts to push him off me. He'd been too strong, too determined. I shivered under the June sun. Thank God my roommate had come in when she had, or who knows how far it would have gone. As it was, he'd groped and fondled, but never managed to get my pants off. Still, the experience had left me with a bad taste in my mouth whenever dates started to get too close. I froze up, panicked. My stomach still turned when I thought of how the jerk's hands had felt on my skin, and no matter how attracted I was to a guy, that was all I could think of whenever a man leaned in for a kiss. Needless to say, intimacy was not exactly my strong suit. I didn't say any of that to Emmy, however. It wouldn't have made a difference. Her mouth was set in a stubborn line. Go on, say hello, she said. Her eyes were filled with a familiar mischievousness, the kind of look she used to give right before I walked into whatever booby trap she laid for me in our shared bedroom. Why? My eyes narrowed with suspicion. She wouldn't just push me to flirt with any old guy. Do you know him or something? Or something. She nodded, barely able to contain her laughter. You will too. He's your new boss. I blinked at her uncomprehendingly for a moment, but then her words clicked and my brain registered their meaning. My boss? That perfect specimen of a man was my new boss? Emmy had been working as the office manager for a local guest ranch, Hawk's Landing, since she graduated college. She'd be leaving in a matter of weeks to have the baby and didn't plan to return to work. Since I just moved home after finishing up my master's degree in Denver, Emmy had talked her employers into giving me the job sight unseen. It was a good job in my field, and I'd been grateful for the opportunity. But now, I stared after the large, manly man who'd walked off toward the stables, and I tried to still the butterflies in my belly. Well, now I was nervous for so many reasons. I couldn't work for a man like that. How was I supposed to interact with a haughty cowboy and still maintain any sort of professionalism? I'd be a stammering, bumbling fool around him. He's not a professional bull rider? The way he'd pivoted and rocked his hips on that bull made me wonder what he'd be like using them for riding something else, like me. Was the sun getting hotter? Nope. He does it just for fun. Fun. taunting every conscious female more likely. Emmy's voice was laced with laughter. If you think he's gorgeous, wait until you meet his business partner. I turned to see if she was serious. She was. Oh, shit. There are 2 of them? My mind reeled. 2 hot men would be my new employers. Oh, Lord help me. She nodded and wrapped her arm around me as she steered me in the direction of the stables. Go on, she urged. You need to meet the owners eventually. You might as well introduce yourself to Matt now. Get it over with. I looked over with apprehension. Why, is he a jerk or something? Her head dropped back as she let out a loud laugh like I'd just said something hilarious. A jerk? Nah, Matt is sweet as can be. I just meant it'd be better for you to meet him now, somewhere casual, before he becomes your boss. I don't know. I hedged, dragging my feet as she attempted to lead me. She came to a stop and I nearly toppled over. Dropping her arm from my waist, she placed her fists on her hips as she turned to face me with her know-it-all look that I hated. Mainly because when she wore it, she was typically right. Like now. Rachel Andrews, if you don't conquer your nerves about meeting this man, you're going to be useless as his office manager. I pressed my lips together, wishing she wasn't right. I needed to do this. I had to rip off the Band-Aid and get over my nerves. Nerves which were completely unfounded. She'd worked for Matt for years, and I hadn't once heard of him being an asshole. No doubt her husband's would pound him into the ground if he so much as hurt Emmy's feelings, let alone something worse. Fearless. That was me. Fine. I'd go meet my gorgeous, jaw-dropping boss. I gave her a short nod before I could change my mind, and headed toward the stables. Right. I could do this. I took a deep breath. I can do this. I can do this. I chanted that line over and over until I entered the crowded stable. The powerful smell of hay and horses tickled my nose. There were a number of dusty, sweaty cowboys, but just as many scantily clad buckle bunnies who swarmed around like gnats. Just like any other sport where there were powerful, attractive men, there were the women who were looking to bed them. I was way overdressed in comparison. I had on boots and jeans and a pale pink snap shirt. I wasn't frumpy by any means, but I didn't let it hang out at a dusty rodeo. Not like these women. Most wore camisoles or slinky tees and short shorts. One buxom blonde to my right was very clearly wearing no bra. It wasn't cold at all, but it was below freezing out if her pointy nipples were anything to go by. I looked away, glancing around the milling people, trying to find my new boss. Since it was the county fair, there were more events going on than just the rodeo. I didn't see Matt, only met the curious gazes of other cowboys and the women who clung to them. I tugged at the edge of my shirt and tucked my chin as I headed further into the breach. I felt ridiculously out of place. I wasn't the only woman with a button-down shirt, but I was the only one who wasn't wearing it open halfway down my chest to show off a lacy bra. I definitely did not belong, but I'd come this far. There was no way I could turn back now. Emmy would never let me live it down. I was just meeting my new boss. That was it. He wasn't a smokin' hot cowboy. He was my boss. Boss, boss, boss. Chapter 2. Rachel. Finally, I caught sight of him. Matt. I corrected myself. He had a name and it wasn't Matt. Or Mr. Something or other, and it wasn't Mr. Hottie. He was talking to one of the other riders, and though there were buckle bunnies hovering nearby, he didn't seem to notice them. I forced myself to take a step in his direction, and then another. One more step and he caught sight of me. Oh, holy jeez. His eyes were a steel gray, and they landed on me with the intensity and accuracy of a missile guidance system. For a second I couldn't breathe, and my feet faltered. Boss, boss, boss. My whole body seemed to go haywire as those eyes assessed me. Without looking away, he said something to the rider, and the other man walked off. The path was clear. He stood waiting for me to finish crossing the short distance between us. His dark hair had a crease from wearing a cowboy hat, and his skin was bronzed from being in the sun. He didn't ride a desk. Owning Hawk's Landing took him into the outdoors every day. His features were almost perfect. Almost. The slight ridge in his nose and the severity of his jaw added just enough imperfection to make him real, touchable. I swallowed down an excess of saliva. Where the hell had that thought come from? This man was my boss, or he would be my boss. Either way, he was off limits. Yeah, but I was pulled to him as if by a pheromone tractor beam. Licking my lips, I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and forced my shoulders back. Act confident, be confident. That was what my older sister Sheila used to say. Here was hoping Sheila knew what the hell she was talking about. "Well, what do we have here?" the haughty cowboy said as I drew near. Matt. His name was Matt. I needed to get my head on straight. For the millionth time, I reminded myself that while this guy might be a cowboy, and yes, he was sexy as hell, he was also my boss. Boss. His gaze raked over every inch of me, from my well-worn leather boots to the top of my head and everywhere, yes, everywhere, in between. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowed for just a moment. I started to smile and hold out my hand, but he cut me off before I could introduce myself. "Must be my lucky day if a sweet little thing like you is seeking me out." I blinked up at him in surprise, stopped in my tracks. I'd been wrong. Those eyes weren't a steely gray. That sounded cold, clinical, when his gaze was anything but. His gaze burned. It singed my skin wherever it roamed. I felt my nipples harden. I'm Rachel." My hand was still partially extended, hanging awkwardly between us until he grasped it in his. Oh dear. Oh my. Never in my life would I have guessed that holding a man's hand could feel so sensual. I felt so feminine since it was huge, all but engulfing mine. Maybe I was overreacting. Okay, I was definitely overreacting. But there was no denying that his calloused, firm grip did something to me. It sent a jolt of electricity right to my clit. The heat that had scorched my skin was in my blood, heating my core, turning my insides to jelly. And he sensed it. His lips were curled up in cynical amusement, and his expression was knowing. Oh, God. He knew I was turned on. That crazy inferno of heat rushed up to my face and my cheeks caught fire, all from just a handshake. He chuckled softly and took a step closer to me so I could smell his heavenly, earthy scent. It was a mix of leather and grass and sweat, and something I couldn't put my finger on. Whatever it was, it seemed to be a panty-melting concoction specially made to drive me wild. It was working. I almost moaned when he leaned closer, his mouth tantalizingly near my ear. "What brings a nice girl like you to a rodeo?" I took a deep breath and tried again. "This isn't a place for someone like you," he advised, checking out every inch of me. Why wasn't this a place for me? I was just introducing myself. A woman in a pair of very short Daisy Dukes and cowboy boots caught my eye. Oh. "No, it's not that. I like watching—" "You do you?" His voice was low, suggestive. My cheeks could not possibly get any hotter without bursting into flames. His tone said that he knew my every intimate, dirty thought, and he liked it. I cleared my throat, trying to ignore the rockets of desire that his husky, knowing voice was setting off. "I wanted to tell you—" His hand on my waist silenced me instantly. The words, "I'm your new office manager," remained unspoken as I froze at the unexpected contact. He was being really forward, and it felt good. "What did you want to tell me?" he asked. He was a good foot taller than me, but he leaned in so close we were practically eye level. His eyes were so gray, but I figured they'd probably change color depending on what he wore. More importantly, what do you like to watch? Watch? I just wanted to introduce myself. My mouth was open because I'd never had a guy talk to me so blatantly before. Every word coated with innuendo. My brain had stopped working. His stormy eyes held me transfixed. "Did you like watching me ride?" His fingers squeezed gently, just enough that I could feel them through the thin cotton of my top. Yes. Holy hell, the answer was yes. I loved watching him ride, but his gruff, suggestive tone made it clear we were talking about more than just the rodeo. As if to make that point clear, he continued on. Did you like watching me control that bull? His hand moved up. Is that what you want? To be tamed? What? No. But even as I thought it, my brain went somewhere dirty and dark. A vivid image filled my brain. This cowboy naked over me, gripping my waist and riding me hard, taming me. He leaned in close, whispered in my ear. I felt his breath fan the nape of my neck. I bet that's what you like in bed. Am I right? His free hand grasped my waist lightly, his calloused fingers softly stroking the sensitive skin there. I gave a sharp inhale and my eyes widened to the point that they hurt, partly at the crudeness of his words, but partially because I suspected he knew exactly where my mind had gone, and I was horrified. I was getting turned on by the dirty talk of a stranger. He was gorgeous, but he was a stranger. No, he wasn't a stranger. He was my soon-to-be boss. Do you like being tied up, darling? He gave me a small smile that was filled with promise. I bet you're a sweet submissive. He leaned in even closer so no one could hear us, creating the illusion that we were alone together even though there were people milling about. A voice over the loudspeaker announced another rider. A muffled cheer went up. What do you say, sweetheart? Do you want me to take you over my lap for a spanking? My brain conjured that image so clearly I let out a little squeak of alarm. But then alarm was followed by a rush of lust that had me wobbly on my feet. He was watching me, waiting for an answer. No, I don't. I stopped myself that time, bit my lip. What was I going to say? I don't even like to be touched. I'm a frigid virgin, but thanks for asking. He smirked at my silence. Want to know what I'd do with a buckle bunny like you? I shook my head. I wasn't a damn buckle bunny. I was a frigid virgin. Yet I wanted to hear his answer, even though I knew by the way his eyes darkened and his voice lowered to an intimate whisper that what he'd say would be crass and dirty. But I wanted to know what he'd do to one of the willing women just waiting to pounce. What he'd do with one of them, but not me. His gaze dropped to my breasts, which were well concealed beneath the modest top. Could he see my nipples were hard? First thing I'd do is unbutton that damn shirt so I could see those pretty tits of yours. Then I'd take a nipple in my mouth and suck on it until you begged me for more. I bet they were pretty pink. My gasp was soundless, but his grin grew at my shocked reaction. I should have told him to stop talking. I should have walked away. I should have done anything but continue to stand there and stare at him, encouraging him with my passive silence. But I couldn't have moved if I'd wanted to. My legs had frozen in place as hot desire coursed through me at his dirty words. I could see it clearly. Him shoving my bra aside, and those firm lips of his moving over my breasts, working one nipple then the other, leaving a hint of whisker burn behind. He was watching me closely, his gaze filled with a knowing condescension that I hated, even though it turned me on. He leaned in again, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting to hear what he'd say next. You're wet for me, aren't you, darling? His voice was a low drawl, and it made me shiver. Do you want to know what I'd do next? No. Yes. Oh, my God. I wanted his hand to move from my waist. I wanted him to tug me into him so my breasts pressed against his chest. Maybe then it would ease the ache. I wanted him to touch me. I needed to be touched, or I'd go crazy. Once you were so turned on, you were begging me for it. I'd take you back there behind that last stall. He angled his head down the long center aisle. His hand tightened on my waist again, and I bit my lip to hold back a moan. I'd press you up against the wall, pull down those jeans of yours, and prove I was right, that you're dripping for me, ready to go for a wild ride of your own on my hard cock. I promise I'll last more than 8 seconds. I let out a little sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a cry. Oh, hell, my panties were wet. The image made me ache so badly I had to squeeze my thighs together. but that only made it worse.
Is that what you want?
He backed away a bit and dropped his hand. The loss of that touch made me want to reach out to him, but I held myself in check. The cozy, dangerous, naughty atmosphere between us had shifted into something else. There was more mockery than passion in his tone. His knowing smile held more amusement than smoldering desire.
Do you really want to be fucked against a horse stall when a bunch of dirty cowboys and their ladies could walk by?
The sudden coldness in his voice was like a bucket of ice water in my face. I blinked furiously as my body came back from the brink and my mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened, what he'd said. I took a wobbly step back, crossed my arms over my chest.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
He shook his head, looking down at me like I was a disobedient child.
Let that be a lesson to you, darling.
He gestured around at the cowboys and buckle bunnies.
This isn't your scene.
I knew exactly what he meant by that, and he was right. This wasn't my scene, and he didn't want me. Hadn't I been thinking the same thing when I walked in? Hadn't I been trying to tell Emmy that? But that didn't stop my chest from aching like he just reached out and struck me.
You're out of your league.
He continued, not unkindly, but his words stung. Of course. Humiliation had me feeling like he'd just jerked the carpet out from under my feet. I should have known. He wasn't really hitting on me. He was mocking me, making a statement, as if I needed him to point out that I wasn't the type of woman men like him went for. I wasn't sexy. I didn't flaunt my assets. Not that I really had any. I had decent curves. Emmy had always been envious of my C-cups, but nothing like these women who should be on the cover of Playboy. I had no delusions that I was a sexy bombshell. I never had been, and I never would be. I was out of my league. Even if I could manage to get this man to desire me, one kiss and he'd realize that I wasn't for him. I could never satisfy him, not the way a woman should. He was out of my league. I refused to acknowledge my disappointment. It was ridiculous to be upset. I didn't want the kind of dirty, emotionless sex he described. I wanted a relationship. Sure, I wanted sex, but sex that meant more than a quick fuck without exchanging names. My wet panties begged to differ, but I shoved that thought to the side. His gaze softened a bit. Reaching out, he gently chucked the underside of my chin like I truly was a child.
You're clearly too good for this place, darling. I hope you see that now.
His condescending compassion was somehow worse than his mockery. Anger swept through me, temporarily knocking aside the humiliation and disappointment. I was an adult, damn it, a grown woman who could go wherever she pleased, without being taught a lesson. No matter what he thought, I hadn't been coming on to him. I wasn't going to throw myself at my new boss. I wasn't an idiot, but it seemed he thought me one. And I didn't need some cocky, arrogant stranger to tell me that I wasn't sexy enough for him and his friends. Furious indignation had me standing taller and forced me to meet his gaze. His brows shot up, no doubt shocked to see that this supposed wannabe buckle bunny had a backbone. Yes, I see that now, I said slowly, clearly, talking to him like he was the child and not me. But I approached you because I wanted to introduce myself, not throw myself at you. It probably wouldn't be the best first impression of your new employee, now would it? His forehead furrowed in a frown.
What are you talking about?
I sniffed hotly as I tilted my chin up to face him. I don't like watching people fuck. I'm not interested in seeing if you can go longer than 8 seconds outside of the ring. I liked watching you in the rodeo, you jerk. I'm Rachel Andrews, Emmy's older sister, and your new office manager. I didn't wait for his response. It was only a matter of time before my anger faded, and I couldn't bear for him to see me cry when the full weight of it all hit me. The fact that I'd been solidly rejected. Worse, that I'd have to face this man who'd humiliated me every day for the foreseeable future. If he tried to call out, I didn't hear him. I was already outside the stable, back in reality.
Chapter 3. Matt. The barking dog was packed, just like it was every Friday night. It was the best bar in Bridgewater, and locals crowded around the booths in the back and the pool tables behind me in the bar area. Country music pumped from an old-fashioned jukebox in the corner. But despite the crowd, there was only one person who caught my interest. Ethan fucking called me on it. "Man, you've gotta stop staring. If she catches you, we'll be worse off than we already are." I turned to glare at him. Yeah, he was my friend and business partner, but that didn't prevent me from giving him the finger. I took a swig of my beer. The she in question had been a sensitive topic ever since that rodeo. That goddamn disaster of a rodeo a month ago. Yeah, I'd won the event, but I'd ruined every chance we had with the one. How the hell was I supposed to have known the hottest thing on the planet was our new office manager, and that the woman I'd try to scare away from fucking an asshole on the rodeo circuit was Rachel Andrews? That logic hadn't worked on Ethan. Seconds after she turned away from me that day in a huff, her words having cut me to shreds, Ethan had come up to congratulate me on my ride. I'd pointed to her retreating form, her luscious ass wiggling in her jeans as she raced out of the stable and far, far away from me. "Do you know who that is?" I'd asked, still dumbfounded by her revelation. "Sure," Ethan had said, his confusion obvious, as was the obvious admiration in his tone. "She's our new office manager. Emmy pointed her out to me earlier when I was in line at the concession stand. She's something else, isn't she?" After a long silence, during which I'd stared after her well after she disappeared, Ethan had finally asked why I was so curious. "Oh, no reason. I might have just ruined our chances with the woman we'd been waiting for, the woman of our dreams. Because by then I'd seen the truth of it and slapped me across the face. No, her words had done it for her. The adrenaline rush that had made me act so reckless had drained away and been replaced by the stark truth. Rachel Andrews was ours. Not just our new office manager, but she was our woman. The one Ethan and I had been waiting for. The one we'd share and claim. Marry. Even if I had been born elsewhere, I was a Bridgewater man through and through, and that had been the reason I'd gotten so crazy protective. The reason I'd stupidly tried to scare her off. The moment I'd seen her, I'd have the urge to bundle her up and whisk her away, far from the jaded rodeo world of users and takers. Sure, there were family men in the bunch, gentlemen, but there were also young guys willing to fuck anything that had tits and a willing pussy, and I'd wanted her nowhere near them. But I'd been so amped up, I'd gone about it all wrong with her. I hadn't taken a second to wonder why I'd been so protective, why my heart said mine at the mere sight of her. But she wasn't just mine, she was ours. Mine and Ethan's. And so I'd had to tell him just how badly I'd screwed up. I hadn't been able to keep the truth from him. He was my best friend before anything else. We'd created Hawk's Landing together, from scratch. It may have been my property, but it was his business skills that made it what it was today. I was just a dumb baseball player with parents who'd had a large piece of Montana real estate. With my pro ball earnings, I'd bought them out, and Ethan and I had built up the place to have cabins for over 50 guests along the river. He was the one who made the place run so well. Well, and Emmy. But she'd had her baby and found her perfect replacement. Her sister. Yeah, I'd blown it. If I was going to get slapped in the face by our new office manager, he had to know why. Hell, if I was going to get slapped with a damn sexual harassment suit, he deserved to know about that too. He'd been pissed, and rightfully so, but no one had been angrier than me. Why had I tried to drive her away with sexual innuendo? Stupid. If I could go back to that day and do it all over, I would. But I couldn't. Instead, I was forced to apologize, so she didn't quit before she even began, and behave like the perfect gentleman at work so that maybe, just maybe, I could earn her trust again. To prove to her I really wasn't an asshole, and not just for my sake, although I wanted her more than I'd ever wanted anything, but for Ethan's as well. He'd finally met her face to face in her first day in the office, and he'd felt it just like I had. The connection was there, and it was real. She was the one we'd been waiting for all these years. I'd known she was special at the rodeo, but I'd been such an idiot. I'd stupidly thought she was there to hit on the cowboys, and I'd known without a doubt that I'd had to keep her from making a mistake. Of course, I hadn't known she was Rachel Andrews then. Still, she wasn't Buckle Bunny material. She was too good for that. There was an innocence and purity about her that had made me want to toss her over my shoulder and haul her out of there. Keep her safe. Keep her all to myself. And Ethan. Since I hadn't been able to do that, I'd done the next best thing. I'd been a fucking idiot and tried to scare her away. And I'd succeeded. Not only from the damn rodeo assholes, but from me. The only asshole she'd encountered that night. Fuck. Some days I wanted to punch myself in the face for those things I'd said. In one moment of testosterone-fueled idiocy, I'd gone and screwed everything up. Which meant that now Ethan and I were forced to sit and watch as she ate dinner across from Bob, the biggest douche canoe of them all. Bridgewater was a small town. Everyone knew everyone, and while Hawk's Landing was 10 miles out, I'd heard all the gossip about this Bob guy. Despite Ethan's warning about staring, I found myself glaring at the booth where Rachel sat smiling at the asshat. God, she looked good. Better than at the office. While we weren't fancy at the guest ranch, her outfits were always conservative, professional. I knew she had a gorgeous body beneath her modest tops and trim pants. I never missed the full curves of her breasts, the roundness of her hips. They'd be a perfect handful, at least. And those hips, I'd be able to get a good hold of them as I fucked her from behind, move her as I wanted as she rode me. I'd be able to see her face, to watch her as she came all over my cock, to see her green eyes flare with heat. I wanted to muss her up, to have her chestnut hair wild over my pillow, to tangle my fingers in it. I might have dirty thoughts where our office manager was concerned, but I was putting a ring on it. When I finally got my lips on hers, it would be my last first kiss. But Bob, she'd be the first of the week. Maybe, if he hadn't dipped his dick already. He was a player. He fucked and fled. He was nowhere near good enough for our Rachel. Ethan seemed to know what I was thinking, took a swig of his beer. His voice sounded weary. She's off the clock. She can hang out with whomever she wants. Yeah, I grumbled. Well, whomever she wants is Bob Stevens from the hardware store. Ethan's head snapped up at that, and now he was the one craning his neck for a better view of Rachel. He was taller than me and leaner, but the guy could hold his own in a fight. Shit. I was already fantasizing about how we could take Bob out back and beat the crap out of him for having the nerve to ask out our woman. To even think about her, and I was sure he was. He wouldn't have taken her to dinner if he didn't expect to get her in bed after. But Rachel wasn't our woman. Not yet, at least. And all thanks to me and my big stupid mouth. She'd been working with us for a month now, and each day had been a special kind of hell. We decided on day one we wanted her. I'd known since the rodeo, but Ethan agreed after shaking her hand and seeing her soft smile. Watching her competently pick up where Emmy left off before she went to have her baby. Rachel wasn't just beautiful. She was smart, too. Funny. Kind. So we were stuck in a dilemma. We knew we wanted her, but she clearly wanted nothing to do with us beyond office hours. Correction. Nothing to do with me. She was polite and civil to me at the office, but there was no misinterpreting her cold distance. I'd crossed so many boundaries at the rodeo when trying to keep her from the horny cowboys. She wasn't a Buckle Bunny. She wasn't a one-night-stand kind of woman. I'd met my share on the rodeo circuit, and before that when I was in Major League Baseball. No, she had relationship written all over her, and we wanted to give it to her. Both of us together. And that was why I'd all but shoved her away in the stable that night, to keep her from making a big mistake. But the one who'd made the mistake had been me. She hadn't been throwing herself at me. She'd been introducing herself, as Emmy's fucking sister. Yeah, chance blown. Because of that, she put up an invisible barrier between us that might as well have been made out of steel. Ethan, on the other hand, was the golden boy in her eyes. I'd seen the way she smiled when he greeted her in the mornings. Oh, she didn't flirt with him. She was too much of a professional for that. But she wasn't giving him the cold shoulder either. Lucky bastard. Still, I couldn't be too jealous. It was my own damn fault he and I were sitting on the sidelines, pining over our sweet woman, while she was on a date with the town's biggest jackass. Ethan and I had been best friends since we were kids. I'd grown up on the East Coast, but I'd come with my parents often enough. I'd always loved Montana, and when I had the cash from my time in pro baseball, my parents had been happy for me to buy them out and enjoy their retirement. That had been when I was still playing ball. It was Ethan who'd convinced me to give ranch life a shot with him as my partner, when my baseball career was cut short by a shoulder injury. After 3 years in the majors, I'd had to suddenly find a new career. I'd assumed sports commentating or coaching, but neither had panned out. I'd been too bitter to linger to be involved in a sport I could no longer play. I never imagined I'd turn out to be the co-owner of a Wild West guest ranch. As always, my best friend had been there with a helping hand when I'd needed him most. He'd gotten his MBA and knew what the shit he was doing when it came to keeping the business in the black, hiring the right staff, marketing, even trusting Emmy's judgment on hiring Rachel. Some could say he was the brains and I was the brawn, but Ethan had 20 pounds of muscle on me. We'd always been close, but my moving back to Bridgewater and working the ranch together had solidified our relationship. Over too many beers one night, we realized we wanted the same thing, a traditional Bridgewater marriage. Not only did we want to share the business, but we also wanted to share a woman too. The right woman. We'd just been waiting for her. Well, we'd met her all right, and I'd scared her away. I watched Rachel now, smiling at that sleazy ass with his chinos and polo shirt like he was some sort of big-shot preppy playboy, and not the owner of a small-time hardware store in a tiny town. I had nothing against small business owners. Fuck no. I just had a problem with assholes. She looked amazing as always. At the office, she wore the unofficial uniform of jeans and a button-down shirt with the Hawks Landing logo on it, just like Ethan and me. She always looked professional and put together with her long, soft brown hair pulled back in a bun, or simple ponytail. Her business attire didn't detract from her beauty, only enhanced the feeling of untouchability. Professional, friendly, but nothing more. Just what we wanted from our employees. But not tonight. Tonight her hair was down like it had been at the rodeo. It curled gently around her shoulders, softening her delicate features, and making her seem younger and more light-hearted than she was at the office. She swapped out the jeans for a sundress, and even though it covered her modestly, it molded to her body in a way those damn button-down shirts of hers failed to do. Her tits looked amazing, and the hint of cleavage was enough to get me hard, even from across the room. They'd definitely be a handful. My fingers itched to find out. I remembered the way her eyes had darkened with lust when I'd whispered those damn dirty words at the rodeo. She'd been turned on, and so had I. I hadn't had to use much imagination when I described the ways I wanted to touch and fuck her. I'd had those images seared into my brain the moment she stepped into my line of vision. The fact that she'd gotten turned on made me even harder. There was a wild side to this one. A naughty girl hidden beneath that prim and proper exterior. I'd seen it for a minute or two, but she'd vanished the moment I opened my big mouth and ruined the moment. I'd tried to scare her off, and I'd succeeded. I'd used the words as a weapon, and that had tainted them. The sexy vixen had gone back into hiding after that, and I never saw a hint of her again. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have believed Rachel was just as cold and distant as she appeared to be. But here tonight, with her hair down and her body on display, it was like getting a glimpse of the real Rachel, the one who she tried too hard to hide. I liked this new look. Hell, I loved it. But I hated the fact that it was Bob sitting across from her, soaking in the sight of her warm smile and generous curves. That she dressed that way for him. It should have been Ethan and me. I heard Ethan sigh beside me. She's beautiful when she smiles. If he'd have been talking about anyone other than Rachel, I would have laughed and teased him mercilessly for pining over some chick. But this wasn't some chick, and I was just as gone as he was. We were both a couple of love-struck, mooning idiots. Bridgewater men knew their woman right off. That was true for the two of us. That might not have been such a bad thing if we weren't stuck on the sidelines watching some other man woo our girl. Ethan was right. She did have a beautiful smile. It lit up her face, making her green eyes sparkle. She all but glowed. I leaned forward, not even trying to pretend I wasn't staring. She was smiling all right, but it wasn't genuine. Her lips were curved up, but it didn't go beyond that. She may not have been interested in me in any way, but I watched her, saw everything about her. When she was tired, frustrated, sad, happy. Even when she had a fucking headache, I could tell. So when she plastered on her, "You're an annoying guest, but I have to make you happy" face, I smacked Ethan's shoulder. Look again. Chapter 4. Matt. He frowned and gave me an annoyed stare. We shouldn't be staring. The last thing we need is to creep her out by stalking her on her night off. He was probably right, but I ignored him. My gut was telling me that something wasn't right, and it wasn't just the fact that our woman was on a date with another man. As I watched, I could see the tension building in her. It's not stalking if we're watching out for her. I nodded my head in her direction. Look closely. Does it seem like she's having a good time to you? Ethan turned once again, shifting slightly for a better view, but a waitress passed with a tray of drinks. I watched as his expression went from curious to intent to furious. What the hell is going on over there? She looks ready to bolt out of her seat. I nodded. That had been my take, too. Her shoulders had grown tense, her spine rigid. The smile that had seemed genuine was now a pale imitation. What had Bob said or done to make our girl go all uptight and panicky? If we weren't here to watch out for her, she wasn't alone. She had a room full of patrons to turn to if she needed help. All she had to do was raise her voice and make a commotion. But she wasn't doing that, and I didn't like knowing she wasn't happy. Not for one single second, especially with the douche canoe. I couldn't stand around and hypothesize any longer. Shoving my stool away from the bar, I made my move. I heard Ethan right behind me. He didn't try to stop me, thank God. Not that he could have. The closer I got to her, the clearer I could see her discomfort. Matt. Ethan said my name like a warning. He was worried I was going to lose my temper, and he had a right to think it. Ever since the injury to my shoulder, ever since my baseball career was flushed down the toilet, I'd had a bit of an anger issue. It had been my dream to pitch for the big leagues, and I'd had it, but it had been yanked from me years before I was ready. I'd had the dream but had to walk away because of a fucking shoulder. At 27, I'd had to look for a new career, to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. I never imagined it being the owner of a guest ranch in the middle of nowhere in Montana, and so it had taken a while to get over the disappointment, the anger at my own body for sabotaging my dream. Hell, I'd been mad at the world. Whatever it was, I'd been battling waves of irrational anger, trying my best to work through it any way I knew how. Riding at the rodeo, for example. Doing something wild and reckless. Putting in long hours working on the ranch. All of that was fine and good for keeping my temper in check when dealing with the more annoying guests and tedious vendors. But no amount of physical exertion could temper my anger now. This was different. My anger wasn't directed inward. Adrenaline flooded through me as every instinct told me to protect our woman. I felt Ethan's hand on my arm as we drew close. He tugged to get me to slow down. Remember, we want to scare him, not her. I paused long enough to take a deep breath. He was right. I'd fucked things up enough with my ill-advised asshole act at the rodeo. I'd be damned if I'd make things worse tonight. I gritted my teeth and clenched my hands, fighting for control. God damn it. I hated when he was right. But like it or not, he was a level-headed one. And since I'd done such a bang-up job back at the rodeo, and fucked up his shot with Rachel too, I didn't have a leg to stand on. I turned to him and gave him a short nod. You do the talking. Ethan gave me a small smile and slapped my shoulder. He knew how hard it was for me to stand there and act like a gentleman, when all I really wanted to do was drag Bob out of his seat, ask him what the hell he'd done to make Rachel unhappy, and then bury my fist in his gut. Turned out, I didn't need to ask what he'd done to make her uncomfortable. Ethan and I could see with our own eyes as soon as we drew near. Neither one of them had spotted us, which gave us time to take in the scene. From a distance, all had looked normal. Just a beautiful young woman and a smarmy but nice-looking man sharing dinner at the barking dog. But when we got close, I saw it, and I saw red. His hand was on her knee under the table. We watched as she jerked her leg to the side and his hand fell. But then, not more than 2 seconds later, he moved it back. She visibly flinched at the contact, and he just smiled. Clearly, he couldn't read women's cues for no, or he just didn't care. That was it. I couldn't stand by and watch any more. Luckily for Bob's pretty face, Ethan beat me to the table. Well, well, fancy meeting you here. He turned on the laid-back cowboy charm he was known for, and I was glad to see Rachel's visible relief when she spotted Ethan. Then her hazel gaze turned to me, and the happy look shuddered, but not before I saw a flicker of nerves. Shit. I hated that she was nervous around me. I wasn't like Bob. I wouldn't lay a finger on her if she didn't want it. Yeah, I'd said stuff that wasn't all that appropriate, but I hadn't meant it. I'd been trying so hard to put her at ease this last month in the office. I always kept the door open when she and I were in the same room. Never moved in too close, even though I ached to be near her. I'd maintained the perfect, courteous, gentlemanly demeanor, but it was clear that despite my best efforts, she was still nervous around me. I just hadn't had an opportunity to prove I wasn't that guy. But Bob? He was totally that guy. The fucker. I would have given up the ranch and all my savings for a chance to go back to that day at the rodeo and do it all over again. Listen to the voice of reason that had said, "This woman is no buckle bunny." I'd give her a chance to explain who she was and what she was doing there, before leaping to stupid conclusions. To keep her away from the other horny assholes by protecting her, not running her off. God, I hated to think about how she must see me. Like I was some sort of man-whore or something. That wasn't the case. Sure, I'd had my fair share of women. That I really did want to do the dirty things I'd said to her. But not until she knew we wanted to marry her. I wanted her more than just a night. I hadn't even glanced at a woman since that horrible first encounter. None other had a chance in hell with me now that I'd met Rachel. My dick didn't get hard for anyone but her. Just her scent in the air made me hard. And thinking of her? Fuck. I spent too much time in the shower rubbing one out these days. It seemed I was perpetually hard when she was around, or not around. But how was I supposed to get her to see that if she kept me at arm's length? She was forever. I knew it in my bones. While I wasn't a Bridgewater man born and raised, I was just like one because I knew when I'd found the one. I glared at Bob over Ethan's shoulder. She might not know it yet, but she was ours. Ethan drew closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Rachel, good to see you enjoying yourself. Even though Ethan's voice was calm and even, the gesture was a sure sign of possessiveness, and his eyes said ours, loud and clear as he stared down at Bob. Nicely done, Ethan. He'd managed to calm Rachel while scaring the crap out of Bob. The asshole looked ready to shit himself as his gaze turned from Ethan to me. I stood a few feet away, not wanting to spook Rachel, but I made no attempt to hide my hatred for this handsy piece of shit. Rachel might not know his rep, but we did. And he knew we did. It wasn't going to happen. We'd shut that shit down. Ethan turned to Rachel, and I could see the warmth in his eyes. Sure enough, Rachel blushed. She'd seen it too. You enjoying your night, Rach? He asked. She made a noncommittal sound and started inching toward Ethan, sliding out of the booth. He took her hand, helped her up as she did. Yes, thanks. Fuck. She looked good in the sundress. It was white and fell to flirt just above her knees. She seemed innocent and sweet, the color only highlighting her tan skin, her smooth shoulders. But I think it's time I head home. She barely glanced at Bob as she mumbled a thanks for dinner. That would have made me happy, except she avoided meeting my eye too, as she made a beeline out of there as if the hounds of hell were chasing her. Or perhaps maybe she thought I was chasing her. Bob made a move to stand and follow, but froze when I turned to glare at him, a low growl escaping from my throat. Date's over, I told him, putting my hand on his chest and pushing him back into his seat. And don't call for a second. This asshole didn't realize how lucky he'd been. I was a breath away from losing my shit. The only thing standing between this fucker and a beating was Rachel. I couldn't just let her run away. Not if she was upset, and definitely not out in the parking lot across the street by herself. Yes, she could take care of herself, but we'd see her to safety. The parking lot was dark when Ethan and I followed her out. She was hurrying toward her small sedan, a car we need to replace for her once winter hit. There was no way I'd let her drive to the ranch every day in the snow and ice without four-wheel drive. How we'd convince her to let us buy her a car was a problem for another day. Right now all that mattered was she was unharmed, that she was safely in her car, engine running, doors locked before we left. "Rachel, wait up," Ethan called. She came to a stop next to the car, her hair falling over her shoulders. She stared down at her keys with her back to us. Either she'd forgotten how to unlock her car or she was stalling. We stopped a few feet away, but the distance was killing me as I knew it was Ethan. I wanted nothing more than to go to her, wrap her in my arms and not let go until she was safely tucked into my bed, our bed. After that, well, I couldn't let my imagination go there, or I'd scare her away if she glanced down at my cock. That was the last thing I needed. My cock was already straining against my jeans at the sight of her in that dress. If I started picturing all the ways we'd love to fuck her, I might come right then and there. So I cleared my mind of all thoughts and took some slow, deep breaths to keep cool. Rachel shocked the hell out of me when she spun around to face us. Her normally sweet expression had been replaced by a ferocious scowl. "What was that?" she demanded. I was the one with a temper, and I had come to think of Rachel as Miss Calm, Cool, and Collected. This reversal of roles had me blinking at her like an idiot. I saw Ethan jerk back in surprise, but he recovered quickly, holding his hands up in surrender. "Easy, sweetheart. We didn't mean to step on your toes back there." "I was on a date." She crossed her arms over her chest, and I tried my damnedest not to notice the way it pushed her tits up and out, accentuating her already phenomenal cleavage. "Yeah," Ethan said slowly, his voice soothing. "But it didn't look like you were having a good time." "How would you know?" Her eyes narrowed as her gaze moved from Ethan to me, suspicion written all over her face. "Were you watching me?" She'd asked the last of me, not Ethan. I was the one she was suspicious of. Hell, every time she looked at me she had this wariness in her eyes, as if she was afraid I was going to mock her or say something cruel. And every time I saw that wariness, my gut twisted in pain. How the hell could I get her to see I'd been trying to protect her at the rodeo? I'd never hurt her intentionally. I'd never make fun of her. I couldn't find the words. Everything in me wanted to go to her, crush her to me and claim her lips in a searing kiss. I'd always been better at showing than telling. Maybe I could have done some sort of epic gesture if I hadn't fucked things up so badly 2 months ago. Instead, I shoved my hands in my pockets and answered honestly. "Ethan and I just came here for a beer. We didn't know you'd be here, but we spotted you from across the bar." Ethan hurried to take over, probably afraid I'd lose my temper once I started talking about that dipshit Bob. "We saw you on your date and weren't going to intrude, but it seemed like you were uncomfortable." Her reaction was interesting. She flinched, like Ethan had just insulted her. I wasn't uncomfortable." Her protest didn't convince anyone, and she looked down at her shoes as she fidgeted with her keys. Ironically, at that moment, she looked extremely uncomfortable, and yet we weren't fondling her knee under the damn table. I took a step forward. "We were just looking out for you." Her head snapped up and she straightened her shoulders. Her eyes blazed. "I don't need your protection. I'm not a child and I can make my own decisions." Ethan glanced at me with a question in his eyes. He was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't just about Bob. She wasn't pissed we'd interrupted her date. That last comment had been aimed at me, a clear reminder of what I'd said and done on the rodeo when I told her she was out of her league. Shit. Would I ever live that down? "Look," I said. "I'm sorry if we overstepped our boundaries." "I know you two are my bosses," she interrupted, holding up her hand. "But you can't tell me what to do outside the office." "No one is trying to tell you what to do," Ethan said. His voice was calming even to me. He'd always been better at being the hero. He took another step closer and I watched as she backed away slightly. "Huh. I thought she liked Ethan, but she seemed wary of him too. But, Ethan continued, if we see anyone, at work or not, who won't take no for an answer, you better believe we're going to get involved. Her mouth opened like she might protest, but she shut it just as quickly, confusion warring with her earlier anger. You don't have to do that. I can handle myself. We know you can, baby, I said. She turned those big hazel eyes up to me and I nearly lost my train of thought. But you shouldn't have to. She seemed taken aback by that, and I found myself getting angry all over again. But this time at the nameless asshole she dated in the past. She shouldn't be this confused or surprised to have men looking out for her and standing up on her behalf. Who'd hurt her so badly? I don't need anyone looking out for me. Her voice had lost its anger, and she sounded like she was talking more to herself than to us. Ethan surprised me by moving closer to Rachel. He reached out and gently tilted her chin up so she had to look at him. His voice deepened, and there could be no doubting the sincerity in his tone. You don't need it, but you deserve it. If you were ours, our top priority would be keeping you safe, making sure you were taken care of. Her eyes widened, and I found myself holding my breath. He'd taken a risk laying it out there like that. What do you mean, if I was yours? But even as the words came out of her mouth, I saw understanding dawn in her eyes. Ethan must have seen it too, because his grin was cocky as hell. Well, damn, Ethan got game. Of course she knew what he meant. Rachel had been born and raised in Bridgewater. Emmy had 2 husbands, and I heard her other siblings did too. She knew our ways, and she knew exactly what it meant to belong to 2 men. She hadn't expected it from us, but she liked it. The heat in her gaze was fleeting, but it had been there. Just like back at the rodeo when I talked about giving her a spanking. I would bet my truck that she'd had a mental image of what it would be like to be with the 2 of us. Judging by the flush on her cheeks, she was picturing how it could be right now. Well, all right. Now we were getting somewhere. But then her eyes widened and she took a step back from Ethan, her eyes darting over to me with something close to panic. But I don't, she said quickly, her hands fumbling with the keys. I don't belong to you, so stay out of my business. Ethan and I watched her get into her car and waited until she drove off. So, Ethan drawled, putting his hands on his hips. That went well. I shrugged. I don't think we're any worse off than we were. My best friend rolled his eyes. Considering she hated you and tolerated me, that's not saying much. At least we got her away from that asshole Bob. I might have had a temper, but that didn't mean I couldn't look on the bright side. She might not be going home with us, but at least she's going home alone. Ethan made a sound of agreement before heading back toward the bar. I need a drink. When I held the door open for him, the music hitting us full force, he added, It would have been a bit more encouraging if she hadn't outright told us she wasn't ours. I slapped a hand on his shoulder as I followed him back inside. Not yet, I added, feeling more upbeat by the minute. She's not ours yet. I might have been forced to retire early from my chosen career, but no one had ever called me a quitter, and I sure as hell wasn't about to start now.
Chapter 5. Rachel. I was in love. It was official. Emmy's 2-month-old daughter, Louisa Mary, or Lulu as I like to call her, was my new favorite person on the planet. I'd offered to watch the little sweetheart while Emmy ran some errands, and now I was loath to part with my adorable niece. That seemed to be just fine with Emmy, who looked happy but exhausted from sleepless nights. She lounged on my couch with her mug of tea, while I rocked and shushed Lulu. You look like a natural, Emmy said, her head resting on a decorative pillow, her feet up on the armrest. I smiled and tried to ignore the painful ache in my chest. Lulu was a soft, warm little lump. In her pink footsie pajamas, she had her knees bent up and her hands in tiny fists. She had that perfect baby smell, fresh laundry and milk. She was as bald as a cue ball, but had dark fuzz that was so soft at her nape that meant she had the coloring of her father's. She hiccuped and I couldn't help but laugh. This right here, this was all I'd ever wanted.
A baby, sweet and snuggly. Multiple babies, a family of my own. Maybe it was because I came from a large brood, but that's what I'd planned for myself. I always saw my future with a messy house filled with strewn socks, unmade beds, and slamming screen doors. There would be loud laughter and unconditional love. It never occurred to me that I might not be able to have that dream. I wasn't old by any means, and my biological clock wasn't ticking too loudly. My mother would just tell me to be patient, but I wasn't patient. Not when it came to being able to hold my own perfect child, to rock it and sing. There were no men in my future, especially not with the way I reacted to a man getting near me. I had a personal brand of man repellent, and it was working really well. No men, and that meant no babies. No big family house, no snot-filled noses to wipe. Maybe it was time I finally faced facts. I would never have the kind of relationship that my siblings had. I'd never have a Lulu of my own. I'd never feel comfortable being intimate with a man, and intimacy was kind of crucial when it came to baby making. Even Bob's hand on my knee had creeped me out. Well, he creeped me out. God, I'd been in a funk all morning. I'd hoped some time with my niece would help, and it had to some extent. But it also served to highlight what I was missing in my life. Emmy interrupted my thoughts. So, how'd it go with Bob last night? Ugh, Bob. Since Bob was friends with one of Emmy's husbands and she'd been the one to set us up, I felt bad telling her the truth, so I just shrugged. It was okay. I don't think there was really a spark there. That was my polite way of saying that Bob was a bore. He'd been nice enough, though not exactly witty or charismatic. I'd had to paste a fake smile on my face for an hour as he droned on about his day-to-day chores at his store. And then it had gotten worse. So much worse. Apparently my fake smile had been a little too effective, because after one drink Bob started making moves. Clumsy, awkward moves that had me fully understanding why people use the term frigid. His touch left me cold. He hadn't been terribly inappropriate. It wasn't like he'd started groping me under the table or anything. He'd just touched my leg. My knee, to be exact. Any sane person would have handled it smoothly. Not me. I'd freaked, freezing up like a deer in headlights as that old terror set in. If there had been any doubt Bob was not a contender for a second date, his touch made it abundantly clear. If the feel of his hand on my knee was repulsive, there was no way I'd be able to deal with his lips on mine. That simple, almost platonic touch had been enough to turn me into a block of ice. I'd clenched my teeth and tried my best to keep from rudely jerking away from him, but I pulled away out of instinct. And when I'd shifted my leg away, he hadn't gotten the idea and put his hand back. How much more obvious could I have gotten that I wasn't interested? A drink over his head? I probably would have ended up causing a scene if Ethan and Matt hadn't shown up when they had. My breath caught in my chest for a moment as I remembered the look in their eyes as they'd approached. While Bob's hand on my knee had turned me to ice, their gazes had turned my insides into an inferno. They loomed over the booth and I'd felt small, feminine beside them. Matt had stood a few feet back, quiet but lethal if his glare was anything to go by. Holy hell. If looks could kill, he'd have slaughtered Bob on the spot. I didn't have to be a genius to know Matt didn't like the guy. Had he seen Bob's hand on my knee? Even calm, laid-back Ethan had been appallingly rude. He'd glared at Bob in disgust like he was a lizard who just climbed out from behind a rock. It had taken me by surprise. In the office they were calm, reserved, careful. Their behavior had been shocking and confusing. I had no idea they could be so much like Neanderthals. And now, I wasn't sure what to make of it. I knew they didn't want me, not like that. How could they? They were two ridiculously hot cowboys while I was, well, me. Besides Matt's rude behavior at the rodeo, they'd both been completely benign with me. No heated glances, no crude words, not even a brush of a hand on my arm. They took professional to a whole new level. They'd made it more than clear that I was just their office manager, and they wanted nothing more. And Matt? He'd made his disinterest obvious. I wasn't in his league. I wouldn't know what to do if he ever got me alone, if he ever wanted to follow through on the dirty things he'd said to me. I'd been appalled at the time, but I'd had plenty of time to think about it since. Yeah, I wanted a guy to be so open and, well, hot for me, but he'd used those words cruelly, meant to drive me away. Yeah, I knew where I stood with him. But their possessiveness and protectiveness when they dealt with Bob had left me feeling more desired and turned on than I could ever remember. I couldn't understand it. They were probably just being overprotective because I was their employee, but that didn't change the fact that there had been a persistent, throbbing ache between my thighs as I drove away. If I hadn't known better, I'd have said they were staking their claim, letting Bob know I was off limits. But that couldn't be right. I'd replayed that final interaction countless times as I lay in bed the night before. The memory alone had made me feel things I thought I never would. I didn't seem frigid when I thought of Matt and Ethan. My nipples hardened, my pussy ached with need, and when I used my fingers to ease it, I thought of them, saw their rugged faces in my mind, thought of their big hands on my body, and when I came I cried out their names. What the hell was wrong with me? I'd been on a perfectly nice date with an attractive man who'd flattered me with compliments, but when he touched me, nothing, no sparks whatsoever, only that coldness that filled me with disgust. But then my two off-limit bosses showed up and started acting all domineering and protective, and suddenly I was hot as hell, dreaming about what it would be like to be fucked by two men at once, who came alone in my bed imagining it. Me, the 26-year-old virgin. Maybe that was why I'd overreacted with them in the parking lot. I wasn't used to feeling that way. I had no idea how to act around them. In the office it was easy. There was always a spreadsheet to talk about, work to be done. But at the barking dog, and worse, alone in the parking lot? I'd lashed out the only way I knew to try to push the feelings away, to push them away. If they got too close, surely they'd see the truth. And then they'd laugh. Matt sure would. Like he'd said, I was out of his league. Even still, Matt had made me so turned on back at the rodeo I dreamed about him for weeks. His crass, dirty words had done something to me. They'd made me feel wanton and sexy for the first time in my life. Shit. I had some serious problems. Serious. Normal women couldn't be like this, like me. I finally felt sexual attraction, and it was only when some macho player threatened to spank and fuck me in the stables. I'd chalk it up to a fluke, like maybe my hormones had gone haywire that day or something. But it had happened again in the parking lot. Something about the way Ethan had looked at me when he said, "If you were ours." Yeah, I hadn't forgotten about that. That was all it took. Ethan saying those words and giving me that intense stare, and my deepest, darkest fantasies had been unleashed. All I could think about was what it would be like if they'd ordered me around in bed. But then reality had set in. These were my employers, and now I'd have to face them at work on Monday. How was I supposed to act around them? I could pretend like nothing had happened. For them, it probably had been nothing. Just another night at the bar, looking out for a woman in distress. Lulu wiggled her little butt and I put her up on my shoulder, patted her small back. It was time for a reality check. Sure, they were chivalrous and protective, but they were probably like that with all women. I had to stop myself from reading anything more into it, making up something where there was nothing. But even as I thought that, I couldn't stop thinking about the way they looked at me, like I was theirs. That was a ridiculous thought, but I hadn't been able to shake it even though logically I knew the truth. Matt and Ethan wouldn't want me. Matt was too much of a player. Even if I hadn't seen the way all the buckle bunnies ogled him at the rodeo, anyone with eyes could tell he was a sexual person. The kind of guy who took home a different woman every night and pleasured the hell out of her. Ethan, on the other hand, he seemed like the monogamous type. But monogamous or not, he still wasn't for me. He was too handsome and smart and charming. I'd bet money that half the women in town had a crush on him, and the other half had made their way into his bed at one time or another. He could have any woman he wanted. There was no way he'd want the frigid virgin.
Even as I thought myself in circles again and again, disappointment stung. I knew they weren't the right men for me, but that didn't change the fact they'd gotten under my skin. I'd been trying desperately to ignore the attraction when I was in the office, but I couldn't pretend I hadn't felt the chemistry last night. I'd never lashed out like I had with them. I was going mental, seriously mental. Hormones, bipolar disorder, insanity? That's too bad it didn't work out with Bob, Emmy said, adjusting the pillow behind her head. Have you met anyone that does make you feel a spark? Yes, 2 people to be precise. 2 men who were entirely off limits for so many reasons. There was no way I could tell Emmy about my stupid infatuation with my bosses, her former bosses. She'd either laugh at me outright for lusting after the forbidden fruit of an office romance, or insist I act on it. Neither option was appealing. Not really, I lied, stroking my hand over Lulu's head. But you want to meet someone, right? I shrugged and kept my gaze on little Lulu. Her eyes were still blue, but I had a feeling they'd turn a dark brown before too long. I don't know. Sometimes I think maybe a husband isn't in the cards for me. Emmy made a sympathetic sound that came way too close to pity. You're only 26. Far from an old maid, she countered. I forced a smile. Rachel Andrews, Bridgewater spinster and owner of 30 cats. It's not a big deal if I turn into the cat lady. I don't need a man in my life to be happy. Just then Lulu looked at me and made the most adorable gurgling noise I'd ever heard. I let out a sappy sigh. Can I keep Lulu? You can make another with your men. Emmy laughed and rolled her eyes. You can make one of your own, she countered. There's the small problem of needing a man to make one. If I had a little Lulu, then I really wouldn't mind my single status. I'd give up dating for good. Emmy turned to me with a teasing grin. It's definitely more fun making one of the old-fashioned way. But haven't you heard? You don't need a man to get knocked up these days. There's a sperm bank in Helena that'll give you what you need without the hassle of dating. She was teasing, outright laughing at her own joke. But I didn't laugh. Sperm bank. My brain kicked into gear. All thoughts of Matt and Ethan were pushed to the side as my mind raced with possibilities. Baby possibilities. A flicker of hope made me sit up straight. I didn't need the man, I needed the sperm. I stared at Lulu as I thought it through some more. It would be a lot of responsibility, a huge step to take on my own. But the idea had merit, and the thought of my being able to move forward with my life and my dreams, to not be held back by my stupid fears and hang-ups, it was tempting. It was more than tempting. It was fascinating. My little sister might be onto something.
Chapter 6. Ethan. I was in a foul mood when I walked into the office. Not only did a thunderstorm wash out the trail to one of our usual picnic spots, but the sous chef quit for a job in Miami. I was tired in a way no amount of coffee would solve, and when I saw Rachel's empty desk instead of the woman of my dreams behind it, I became even more annoyed. It had been far too long since that damn night in the parking lot, and despite Matt's optimism, she showed no signs of thawing towards us. Oh, she was all bright and cheerful for the other staff members, but when we were alone in the administrative area, she was like a glacier, thawing toward us at such a slow pace, the change wasn't even visible. She'd been pissed at us for a solid month. 30 days of fantasies instead of getting my hands on her and living out every single one of them. I looked forward to seeing her every day at the office, gleaning all I could from her scent, her voice. And when I took in her vacant spot, remembered she'd gone to a doctor's appointment, I wanted to kick the trash can through the window. When she'd asked for the day off, I wanted to ask if she was all right. She hadn't looked sick, and I certainly would have noticed if she'd changed even her hairstyle. I tried not to hover ever since. A boyfriend could ask personal health questions, but not a boss. And I wasn't her fucking boyfriend, damn it, since she'd made that distinction perfectly clear. If I asked, it would be an invasion of privacy. I'd been following the plan Matt and I came up with, giving her space and hoping she would warm up to us, to show her we were nice guys, normal. Hell, I laid it out there that night in the lot when we'd crashed her date. Instead of warming up to us, she put up even more of a wall. Now it wasn't just Matt she was giving the polite but distant act to. It was me, too. Maybe it was time to admit this plan wasn't working. That was what I mulled over as I glowered at Rachel's empty desk. There was no way in hell either of us would ever give up on making her ours. With every day I spent in her company, I only became more convinced she was the one for us. I thought I'd made it clear that night we wanted her as our woman. Was it possible she hadn't understood? Or maybe she just wasn't interested. No, I'd seen interest there. At least before we'd fucked it all up. But this was destiny. She was our fate. Maybe it was time to push a little. To take her to dinner. Maybe even a trail ride. Something to get time alone with her out of the office. She needed to see us as men, not her damn bosses. I might not have grown up in a Bridgewater family. My dad took off when I was a baby. But I watched my mom find her happily ever after with my 2 stepfathers when I was off at college. Besides that, I'd grown up watching my friends with Bridgewater families have the kind of secure, loving family I'd always wanted. I wanted that with Rachel. To share her love with Matt, to become a family of our own. So what was the holdup? Rachel. No, this wasn't Rachel's problem. It was ours. It was the Bridgewater men's responsibility to show their woman what it could be like. We hadn't done that. Yet. This keeping our distance plan was not working, and I was running out of patience. There had to be a way to prove to Rachel how serious we were, how good it could be. No, not could. Would. When the phone at her desk rang, I walked over to pick it up. As I gave the caller the rundown on the services we offered, I caught myself idly staring at the things on her desk. There were a few pictures of her sister's baby, which wasn't a surprise. Emmy had brought the little girl by to meet everyone, and watching Rachel with her had been more than I could bear. Rachel's whole demeanor had changed as she lit up with joy. Her eyes had been filled with warmth as she'd cuddled the baby close, and all I could think about was how much I loved to see her holding our baby. Soon, I promised myself. Matt and I would come up with a way to get through to her one way or the other, and if she wanted a baby, we'd start a family with her. The idea of filling her with our seed, watching as she swelled with our child? I stifled a groan as I said goodbye to the prospective guest. My eye caught a note she'd scribbled for herself on the pad next to the phone. There were 2 numbers there, one for a place called Cryobank and one for Seattle Sperm. What the hell? Seattle Sperm. There couldn't be any confusion on what that business was. My blood rushed in my ears so loudly I didn't hear Matt come in until he was standing next to me. "You all right, Ethan? You look like you're having a stroke." I snapped out of the shocked trance and turned to face him, holding up the notepad like it was evidence in court. I waved it back and forth and he grabbed the pad from my hands. "She's gone off to have a baby." "A baby? Are you crazy? Rachel's not even pregnant." I spun around, pointed at her neat handwriting. "Read it." Matt was understandably confused until he finally looked. His stunned gaze met mine. "No. Hell no." He dropped the notepad back on her desk. "There's no way in hell we're letting her have some stranger's baby. She's obviously going to raise it on her own since there's no men in her life. Yeah, we'd been vigilant about watching Rachel. Unless she snuck dates into her house, she had no guy in her life, besides us. I knew I was overreacting, but I couldn't help it. Fear had taken over. Rachel was ours. Her babies would be ours. Now, I had no objection to raising another man's child, but there was no way I wanted Rachel to raise a child alone. I'd been the product of a fatherless home, and I'd hated to think of Rachel's child not having a daddy. Not when there were 2 men standing in this room who wanted nothing more than to claim her and do it with her every step of the way. She's at the damn doctor's office now. No, not doctor's office. Sperm bank. I filled him in on the fact that Rachel had asked for the entire day off for some sort of doctor's appointment. "You're telling me our girl is getting knocked up while we're standing here with our thumbs up our asses?" "Yep." "Why is she rushing?" "Because she's too impatient to wait for the right men to come along." "Men," Matt countered. "And we're right fucking here. At least we know there isn't someone else." Matt narrowed his eyes, probably thinking about a dick like Bob getting his hands on her. I groaned, paced. God damn it. If she just gave us a chance, we could give her everything she ever wanted. It would be our honor and privilege to make her dreams come true. If that meant a house full of babies, then it's our fucking job to give them to her. Not a damn test tube. As I was working myself into a state, Matt leaned down, powered up her computer, and started doing some research. He glanced up at me, his expression abnormally grim. I doubt she went to Seattle, so that one's out. That first clinic is in Helena. I'm sure that's where she'll be. I grabbed the keys for my truck from the end of the table in the hallway. Let's go. I tried to calm down on the drive to Helena, but it seemed the closer we got, the more my frustration grew, and the faster my foot pressed on the gas pedal. She'd never even given us a chance. We'd waited too long. I was angry at myself for not acting sooner and pissed at Matt for making such a mess of things with our woman during their first meeting. Considering my heightened emotions, I probably should have stopped for a moment and thought about what I was going to say and do, but I was driven by an urgency to stop Rachel before she made a mistake. Matt seemed just as impatient as me as he raced to the front door of the clinic beside me. We'd barely spoken on the drive, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Yeah, we may have looked like lunatics going in, but I didn't care. It was time to stake our claim because she was making a serious, life-changing decision without knowing how we felt. We could end up losing her for good. Now was the time for action, for better or for worse. That was what I was thinking as we stormed into the clinic, and it was what gave me the nerve to walk right past the reception desk and the startled doctors and nurses in the hallway. We stopped halfway down. On both sides of us there were multiple closed doors. "Where the hell is she?" I whispered. I had no idea how we were going to find our girl. "I guess we could just start opening doors," Matt countered. "That seems a little extreme, even for us right now, and sure to get us kicked out before we could find her." Yeah, I had no intention of walking in on some guy jerking off into a cup. "Excuse me, gentlemen?" We spun around at the voice, ready to do battle, but found ourselves facing a smiling gray-haired woman in scrubs. "The donor's waiting room is that way." Donor waiting room? She pointed in the opposite direction of where we'd been headed. Matt tipped his cowboy hat and gave her a smile that had been known to make panties drop all around the state. "Thank you kindly, ma'am." Oh, Lord. His aw shucks cowboy drawl was over the top. But if he intended to make the nurse sweet on him, it did the job. I assumed he was planning to sweet-talk the old lady into telling us which room was Rachel's, but his tactics proved unnecessary. I saw her walk from the bathroom back to one of the closed doors and step inside without glancing in our direction. Matt must have seen her too, because he turned on the charm and told the older lady, "We'll be right behind you." The moment she turned the corner, we were down the hall, our long strides eating up the distance in 2 seconds flat, and bursting into Rachel's room. She was seated in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, a tabloid magazine in her lap. Her head snapped up as we barged in, and her eyes widened with shock. Or maybe it was horror. "Ethan! Matt! What are you doing here?" Yep, it was horror. Her pretty fair skin turned red as she looked from me to him and back with those overly wide green eyes. "What are you doing here?" Matt asked. I didn't think she could turn any redder, but I was wrong. Her lips thinned and she wasn't going to respond, even though the answer was obvious. "We're here to stop you," I said. If I'd taken a moment to think before I'd spoken, I might have come up with something better. Something that didn't have her staring at me like I'd just lost my mind. "What he means is we wanted to talk to you," Matt said. I noticed he'd taken off his hat and was twisting it in his hands in a rare show of uncertainty. He looked around the sterile, cold room, and I could see he was just as terrified as I was. We were losing her. Our woman, the one we'd been waiting all our lives for a vial of damn sperm. "You want to talk here?" she said, her voice a little more than a squeak. "Now?" I didn't know where to start. We needed time. She needed time to get to know us and to realize we were the men for her. "Don't you think you're rushing into this?" She looked like I'd slapped her. For a second she just stared at me with her mouth partially open. Then she let me have it, stepping up to me and jabbing her finger in my chest.
What on earth gives you the right to come in here and share your opinion on this?
She seemed to struggle with how to say it. I heard her, every word, but I was growing hard at the fiery anger, the way she was giving me hell, and the fact that she was actually touching me. Yeah, she was poking me with her damn finger, but my cock didn't seem to care. And what exactly is this? I countered. If she couldn't say it, she wasn't ready to commit to this path. What are you doing here? Her eyes widened even further this time to let me know that I clearly had a screw loose.
What do you think I'm doing here? I'm going to get pregnant.
With some stranger's baby. Matt finished, his voice laced with anger. Or maybe it was hurt. I couldn't bring myself to look away from Rachel to see his expression.
Yes,
she said, her face turning crimson again. She crossed her arms over her chest, her breasts only lifting beneath her summer dress.
Not that it's any of your business.
It sure as hell is our business, Matt said, his voice rising dangerously. Chapter 7. Ethan. This time it was my turn to step in before Matt said or did something we'd both regret. Again. Rachel, we're not here to judge you. It's just...
That is exactly what you're doing,
Rachel said, glancing at Matt then me.
You've invaded my privacy, completely overstepped your bounds as my employers, and now you're here, at my sperm bank, to tell me that I'm making a mistake?
Matt made a noise that sounded like a growl, but she held up a hand.
What right do you have to be here?
Before we could answer, she continued, narrowing her eyes.
The answer is none. I am your employee, nothing more.
But why like this? Even I could hear the desperation in Matt's voice. You're young, beautiful, smart. There's no rush, is there? She whirled on him, her ponytail whipping around. This time he got the chest poke.
I'm ready to start a family, she said. It's all I've ever wanted, so why not start now?
Matt ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Now's fine, but not with a damn turkey baster. Why not wait to meet a man and...
If I wait for a man, it'll never happen.
Rachel's cheeks were still pink, and her voice was filled with an emotion I couldn't place, but it made me want to hold her close. Something wasn't right here. This wasn't about her being ready, that she wanted a baby as soon as possible. I didn't want her to feel like we were ganging up on her, even though that was exactly what we were doing. Why not? I asked, my voice much calmer than it had been. She noticed, and so did Matt, if the raising of his eyebrows was any indication. She threw her hands up in exasperation.
Trust me, it just won't happen, not any time in this century.
Why not? Matt asked again. He moderated his growl to match my softer tone.
I don't want to say.
I glanced to Matt, who frowned. He reached his arm out, but didn't dare touch her. We're standing in a sperm bank, sweetheart. There's no secrets from us now. I think you can tell us all of it, don't you? She shifted from one foot to the other, and dropped her gaze down to her feet.
Because I'm not appealing like that,
she murmured, her voice just above a whisper.
Not to men. I don't do that.
Her jumbled explanation had Matt and I exchanging a look of utter confusion. You think you're not appealing to men? I asked. The thought was baffling, but she looked sincere when she tilted her chin up with defiance.
I'm not very good in bed. I don't like being intimate.
She shrugged as if it was no big deal, but the emotion in her eyes gave her away. The heated anger was replaced with a mixture of strange self-loathing and embarrassment.
If I'm waiting on that, I'll be waiting a long time. I'm not willing to put off my dreams just because I can't, you know.
She waved her hand in the air. Get laid? Matt finished. I glanced over to see him staring at her in complete shock, and I knew my face must have looked the same. I was trying to understand what she was saying. She wasn't good in bed. She wasn't appealing to men. She didn't do intimacy. Yeah, right. Her cheeks darkened again, and her lack of an answer was an affirmative. It seemed impossible a gorgeous woman like Rachel could seriously think she wasn't attractive to men. But she didn't just believe it. She felt it, too. Felt it enough that a sperm bank was her only option to have a baby. Why on earth do you think you're not appealing to men? She looked to Matt, even though I was the one who asked the question. Her big eyes were filled with embarrassment. She bit her lip. If she only knew how hard that small gesture made me, seeing her plump lower lip indented from her teeth, she'd think differently about herself. Tears filled her eyes, but she took a deep breath, willed them back. I was so impressed with her bravery, with her ability to stay strong when she felt anything but inside. It's obvious, isn't it? Even Matt noticed the first time he saw me. When I turned to Matt, he looked just as confused as I felt. She met my gaze and let out a sigh. Fine. If you really need to hear me say it, I'll say it. I'm a virgin. I couldn't think of a single thing to say in response. My brain short-circuited at that bit of news. I heard Matt mutter holy shit under his breath as he struggled to process this too. It wasn't like we thought Rachel slept around. She definitely didn't seem like someone who took sex lightly. But a virgin. That was a whole other level of innocence we hadn't been expecting. She was younger than us at least, but not that young. Holy fuck, that meant she was untouched. That no man had seen her gorgeous body, touched it, made her quiver with pleasure, learned what made her hot. No man had made her come, heard her scream when she did so. She seemed to know what I was thinking. No, she didn't, because she would have run out the damn door. That's right, she grumbled, walking over to the door. I'm probably the only 26-year-old virgin in America. She looked mortified and angry, and I scrambled trying to think of some way to make this right, to get it through to her she could trust us, that we could make her happy and give her everything she dreamed of. Matt beat her to the door and stood in front of it, blocking her way. He should have done this months ago, to corner her and get the truth out of her. She hadn't been ready. Now? She'd made a big decision about her life and was following through with it, or had been before we barged in, and now perhaps she'd be ready to see everything, including us. You're keeping me here? If looks could kill, we'd both be dead. You sure as hell aren't getting pregnant by an anonymous stranger, Matt countered. Rachel was ours. There was no way in fuck anyone else was going to take her virginity. That pussy belonged to us. Yeah, we might be selfish bastards, but the tables could be turned. If she'd just stand still and listen to us, she'd know we belonged completely and solely to her. You should leave. None of this is your business, and I shouldn't have said anything. God, now my bosses know my darkest secrets. We're men, sweetheart. Right now, here, we're not your bosses. Yeah, well, regardless, you're in no position to tell me what to do. If I want to have a baby, then I have every right to. She was right, of course, about everything. We were probably breaking 10 different types of employee privacy laws just by being in the room. But we'd come this far. There was no fucking way we weren't leaving without telling her how we felt. She told us about being a virgin. We sure as shit could bare our souls, too. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Yeah, you've said that. Again and again. And you're right. But it's our turn to talk. She was quiet for a moment. Her brows drew together in confusion, which was easier to handle than her righteous indignation. Okay, she said slowly. I'm listening. I looked to Matt and he gave me a nod. We want you, Rachel. The words sat there for a moment, a physical presence in the room, hanging between the three of us, waiting for someone to say more. You want me? She repeated. Her voice held a question. We want you, Matt repeated, taking a step closer to her. We want you in every sense of the word. We want your body, soul, and heart. We want you to be our woman, I said, for the long term. She was staring blankly, like maybe she didn't hear us. I looked to Matt. Forever, he added, as if there might be any doubt. Her silence was torture. When she shook her head, it felt like a knife slicing into my gut. I... She cleared her throat. I don't understand. Relief came so quickly it nearly knocked me sideways. She wasn't saying no, yet I hadn't thought our words were very confusing. I reached for her hands and was grateful when she didn't try to pull away. It was the first time I'd ever touched her, and it seemed poignant that it happened in this moment, when I said these words. We've known from the very beginning, Rachel. You're the one for us. It's always been you. Only you. Matt stepped up beside me so the three of us were so close our shoulders were touching. We were a unit, a family. Now we just needed her to see that. She shook her head again, but this time it seemed like she was trying to clear her thoughts, like she was having difficulty making sense of what we just said. Had we given her too much space? Had we taken our plans so far that she didn't think we were interested in her at all? Maybe it really was coming as a shock to her that we'd been lusting after her all these months. Maybe she hadn't realized how serious I'd been when I told her how it could be between us if she was ours, or that we'd been joking. Was that why she'd given us the cold shoulder? Because she thought we were playing with her? She glanced up at me, then Matt. But I'm not your type. I'm not good enough. What are you talking about? Matt demanded. Whoever said you weren't good enough, I'll kick his ass. Shit, Rachel. What kind of men have you been dating that you'd even think that? Her eyes were wide as she stared up at him. You said that. That day at the rodeo, you said yourself that I was out of my league. I glanced at Matt. I knew he'd fucked up with her that night, but this? What the fuck? He looked like someone had just punched him in the gut. His mouth fell open and the blood drained from his face. He recovered quickly and cupped her chin in his hand. Baby, you got it all wrong. When I said you were out of your league, I meant you were too good for every loser in that place. His lips pulled up in a lopsided grin. Including me. Oh, she said softly. Her cheeks flushed pink and her shoulders relaxed. I could actually see the tension drain out of her small frame. Really? He groaned, and I had to fight the urge to slap him upside the head for getting such a stupid idea into hers. 4 months. 4 fucking months of confusion because he'd said something stupid. 4 months wasted. 4 months where I could have done more with our girl than hold her hand. Baby, I promise you the moment I saw you coming, I knew you were special. Matt continued. I had this crazy need to protect you, to keep you from sullying yourselves with the assholes and players who were at that rodeo. I know I went about it all wrong, and for that I am so sorry. Can you forgive me? I held my breath as I waited for her response. When she finally nodded, I let the air out of my lungs. On impulse, I pulled her into my arms and pressed her to me, my lips coming down on hers in a gentle kiss that left me aching for more. Yeah, this was what I'd been missing. The lush feel of her pressed against me, her breasts pillowed into my chest. Her mouth. I groaned. It was sweet and soft and perfect. And the way she gave herself over to it? Incredible. When I pulled back, she stared up at me with a dazed look on her pretty face. God, I couldn't wait to see what she looked like when she was being pleasured. By us. I wanted to make her moan and beg and... Shit. We had to get the hell out before I became an unwitting sperm donor right then and there. And I wasn't taking her damn virginity in this place. I stroked her hair back from her face, trying to rein in the hope that was threatening to burst out of control. I know I should phrase this as a question, to let you decide, but no. You're ours. We'll date, court, woo, hell even fuck. But we're not letting you go now. When she bit her damn lip again, hesitating, I hurried to continue. Let us show you how good it could be. She licked her lips, and I heard Matt groan beside me. My bet was I wasn't the only one with a hard cock in this room. I don't know if I can make you happy. Her voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear. I don't know what I'm doing, in the bedroom. And those words made my cock press painfully against the zipper of my jeans. You let us worry about that, Matt said. Our priority is to make you feel safe, cherished, and happy, and well-pleasured. He winked, then slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. The bastard. I wanted to hold her. I only had a quick taste of her lips, and I wanted more. She was like a damn drug. Making sure you're satisfied in bed is all part of the package, he added. I looked around the sterile room with its fluorescent lighting. Sweetheart, I can promise you this. If you come with me and Matt, you'll have a far better time getting knocked up than you would if you stay here. That's right. If you want a baby, you'll get one from us, the old-fashioned way. Matt added, his gaze heated as if he were thinking about filling her with his cum and making a baby. She giggled at that, and I felt a surge of heat rush through me at the sound. Fuck. I wanted to hear her laugh every day of my life. But for now I needed to feel her, taste her. If I didn't get her in bed soon, I might lose my mind. I'm clean, baby, Matt said. I was impressed he remembered something so important. Been tested, even have the paperwork. Me too. You don't have to worry about anything with us, I added. She was a virgin, so the chances of her having some kind of STD were slim. But surely she'd been tested by the sperm bank. I had no interest in having this conversation later. I wanted her mind free of any worry. I wanted her mind free of everything. She gave a nod, then grew serious. I could practically see her mind racing, trying to think ahead and plan for every outcome. Our woman was nothing if not practical.
But what if I do get pregnant? She asked. I couldn't ask you two to be fathers. It's too soon. We barely know.
I put my fingers over her soft lips to keep her from finishing. Fuck, they were soft. And when her tongue flicked out and licked my fingers ever so slightly, I stifled a groan. Haven't you heard a word we've been saying? Matt asked. We're in this for the long haul, as in forever. Ethan and I have always wanted a big family. We've just been waiting for the right woman. By his shit-eating grin, it was clear he assumed this was a done deal. Her major objections had been overcome, and now it was time to celebrate. Not just celebrate, but make a baby. If you want a baby, then we'll give one to you. But we're doing this, like we said, the old-fashioned way. Our cocks deep in that virgin pussy, filling you with our seed. Sound good to you? I watched as she flushed at Matt's words. He was the dirty talker. Those kinds of words were what got us into this whole mess in the first place. But we told her we wanted her. Hell, we were standing in a fucking sperm bank. It was time she knew what we'd do with her, how she'd get that baby she wanted so badly. Who do you want first, sweetheart? Who were you going to let open you up for the first time? Rachel glanced between the two of us, and she bit her damn lip again. A slow, shy smile spread across her face.
That's not fair, she replied. I can't pick. Surprise me.
Oh, we'd surprise her. We'd watch as her eyes widened at the pleasure we'd give her, how it would feel to have her men take care of her. Fuck her, fill her, mark her, and the time to do so was now.
Chapter 8. Rachel. Surprise me? What had gotten into me? I was never that bold, especially with men. But they'd grinned almost wickedly at that and moved so quickly. I was sure my head was spinning. I had no idea they'd been so interested in me. Matt had made it abundantly clear I wasn't what he was looking for. The brawny cowboy had told me outright and with embarrassing clarity. Then Ethan had been all bossy and dominant at the barking dog that night. But then nothing. Bam! It was like the two of them shut everything down. They never got within 5 feet of me, only looked me in the eye when speaking of ranch business, and even then, it was with a cool indifference that told me all I needed to know. 2 hot cowboys weren't interested. But now, I felt nervous and hot, tingly and a whole lot confused. They wanted me. They had all along. They'd come all the way to Helena to stop me, to tell me the truth about their feelings. All this time I thought otherwise. I inwardly groaned at all the heartache and frustration that could have been skipped. How many nights had I lain awake bothered and miserable? Too many. Enough that I decided to get pregnant on my own. And that plan was not something they liked. Oh no. Their Neanderthal ways were showing. They wanted me, and if I was going to have a baby, they were going to fuck me until we made one. Holy hell. My pussy ached at the idea, yet I was also petrified. I told them the truth. I wasn't good at intimacy. What if I freaked on them? As Ethan helped me gather my things, Matt got on his phone and I heard him booking a room at a nearby hotel. I watched them with wide eyes, taking in their well-worn jeans that molded perfectly to their grab-worthy butts and powerful thighs. Matt was leaner than Ethan, but his shoulders were broad and well-defined in his gray t-shirt. Ethan wore a plaid snap shirt with the sleeves rolled up. I couldn't miss the corded forearms tanned from their time outdoors. And all that male goodness was going to be mine to touch and grab and lick and... Matt hung up, gave Ethan a quick nod, held out his hand for me. Oh, wow. A hotel? Now? When they said they wanted to get started with the baby-making, I hadn't realized they'd meant right this second. I'd barely begun to process the fact that these two sexy, charming, outrageously hot men were interested in me. No, not just interested. They wanted forever. That word gave me a thrill. Forever. I couldn't believe they'd actually said that. Heck, I couldn't believe they actually wanted me. Me, the 26-year-old virgin, their prudish, prim office manager. They could have anyone they wanted, and they wanted me. I just hoped they wouldn't change their minds after one night in bed with me. What if I froze up? I pushed that thought to the side. They were grown men, Bridgewater men. I knew how it was. I'd watched Bridgewater relationships unfold around me my entire life. If Ethan and Matt said I was the one for them, then I needed to trust them. They knew what they wanted. They'd just been idiots and hid every dang sign. I might be a virgin, but I wasn't clueless. Now it was obvious of their interest. Why had they been so good at hiding it all this time?
Are you all right? You look a little dazed.
Ethan said as he led me out to the parking lot. The sun was shining and it was warm after the cool antiseptic feel of the clinic. His hand was at the small of my back and it felt reassuring. He hadn't touched me before the kiss. I didn't even remember a handshake, but the kiss. God, that had been good. My lips still tingled. Dazed? Yeah. I nodded. I'm fine. Just reeling from the fact that my life had gone from humdrum to the stuff of fairy tales in the span of 10 minutes. I wasn't getting sperm from a test tube. I was getting it right from the source, times 2. 2 guys were going to take me to a hotel and fuck me, most likely 6 ways to Sunday. These things didn't happen to people like me. That was because I was a virgin, but now, or soon, I had a feeling it was going to happen quite a bit if the looks of these guys' faces was any indication. But it was happening. As Ethan helped me into Matt's truck, it dawned on me that not only was it happening, but we'd be consummating the relationship in a matter of minutes. I would no longer be a virgin. I sucked in air and tried to steady my breathing. This time it was Matt who gave me a look of concern. I managed a thin smile and he turned back to driving. The hotel was just down the road, so we were there in no time. It was all happening so quickly. Too quickly. By the time we reached the room and they'd closed the door with a loud click behind us, full-blown panic had set in. I didn't know what I was doing, and once they got me into bed they'd see that. What if I let them down? What if I froze up like I did every other time I tried to get close to a man? What if I couldn't please them? What if they didn't like my body and they changed their minds? I had a horrible image in my head of what their expressions would look like when they finally realized the woman they were going to claim was a dud. Oh God, it would be too humiliating. I couldn't do this. I was only setting myself up for heartbreak and disappointment. I was so caught up in my paranoid thoughts I didn't realize Matt and Ethan had stopped in front of me and were watching me with concern.
Breathe, Rachel,
Ethan said, putting his hands on my shoulders. The hard feel of them gave me something to focus on besides my crazy thoughts, and I looked up at him. I felt the heat of his palms, the squeeze of his fingers, the weight of his touch.
Breathe. Slower. Good," he crooned.
Matt stroked his hand over my head, his fingers sliding through my hair.
"Fuck, baby. We're not going to hurt you."
I shook my head. "No, it's not that." I closed my eyes, sighed. I'd screwed up already. "I'm not scared of you." Both men frowned as they loomed over me, blocking most of the light from the hotel room's window.
"Then what is it?"
Ethan asked, his voice soft.
"I know we fucked up before, but you know the truth now. We're here for you. All of it."
Matt reached for my hand, and I was sure he noticed how cold it was.
"Baby, you can tell us anything."
"Even this? Tell them why I was ruined for them? That I was frigid?" For the first time since it happened, I found that I wanted to tell someone. No, not just someone. I wanted to tell them. I needed them to know why I wasn't good for them, why I'd never give them what they needed. They were very virile men. Pheromones pumped off them in waves, and I doubted I could meet all of their needs. I did it quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. There was this guy, in college. Both men stepped back as if they suddenly realized this was a serious topic. It wasn't something simple like I was worried it would hurt the first time. Yeah, I worried a little about that too, because these guys, I was sure, were huge, if the rest of them was any indication. Matt kept my hand in his as he led me over to the bed. I sat on the corner while they tugged the room's 2 chairs to face me. Ethan leaned forward, put his forearms on his thighs, his dark eyes focused squarely on me. While they'd been ready to take me to bed, there was no hint of that now. They were interested in what I had to say, what made me upset. 2 rugged, handsome faces looked at me, waited. I was in college. I'd dated some, nothing serious. I shrugged. I didn't have to explain what serious meant to them since I'd already told them I was a virgin. There was this one guy junior year. It was our 3rd date. We hadn't done anything more than kiss. Matt's hand squeezed mine, and I looked to him, his square jaw clenching. Was he upset I admitted I'd kissed someone else, or because he had an idea of what was to come? I took a deep breath, let it out. He picked me up at my dorm room and came inside. We were supposed to go to a party, but he said he wanted to have a party with only me. I felt nauseated remembering the cheesy and gag-worthy line. Then I'd been a little excited, flattered. I flicked my gaze between the 2. They were waiting, too damn patiently. There was no way I could get out of this now. We started kissing. He had me on my bed and he rolled me beneath him. He got handsy and aggressive and I told him no. I tried pushing him away, but he was too strong. I didn't breathe as I said all that, but took a breath now. I didn't dare look at them, so I stared at the dark green carpet. He said I wanted it, that he'd make it good, that I'd been a tease. I whipped my head up. I didn't tease him, I didn't. Ethan just nodded, so I continued. He was working my shirt from my pants when my roommate came in. He jumped off me and I told him to get out. Julia had been really helpful, all but kicking his ass and then making enough noise in the hallway for the TA to come out. I shook my head. The rest doesn't matter. Just that I don't like to be touched. I freeze up whenever I'm with someone.
"I want that guy's name," Matt growled.
My mouth fell open. "Andy," I said without thinking. Why, it was a long time ago.
"Because I'm going to hunt him down and hurt him."
He was dead serious.
"I'll help,"
Ethan added. I watched as his fists clenched. I laughed then, feeling lighter than I had in a while. You can't go chasing him down. Matt's hand squeezed mine, tugged me up so I stood right before him, between his parted knees. His gray eyes were level with mine.
"We take care of what's ours."
My heart skipped a beat.
"There's nothing wrong with you. Trust us. I can see your nipples are hard right now, and I bet your pussy's wet just thinking about being between us. Your mind might say you're nervous, but your body says otherwise."
It was true.
"When we touch you, you won't think because we'll be doing it right. You'll just be feeling only pleasure,"
Matt said. His hand slid around my waist, and I felt the heat of it through my shirt.
"Trust me. You're going to come so many times you're going to forget your own name.
Oh my.
We're not going to rush you into being with us if you're upset," Ethan added. "But, sweetheart, I can tell you right now, we'll only touch you when you want it and in ways that bring you pleasure."
Matt grunted.
"When you're ready, we'll show you what it can be like with men who don't want to take something from you. We'll give you what you need."
Oh. My body softened, my nipples hardened further at their words. I thought I'd wanted time, that these two would be too much and I'd panic. Well, I had. But they'd heard me out and not only still wanted me, but perhaps wanted me even more. I swallowed down the remaining nerves and pulled back to face them. "I don't need more time. I just need your patience. It might take me a while to, I couldn't finish, but they seemed to know what I meant.
"Sweetheart, we'll take this as slow as you like,"
Ethan said. The heat in his eyes was enough to make me breathless with anticipation. Matt's arm tightened around my waist.
"We'll be gentle. All you have to do is say more, and please, and oh God."
He grinned then, which made me smile too.
"Deal?"
I nodded. "Deal."
Chapter 9. Matt. I wanted to beat the shit out of Andy. Whoever he was, wherever he was. I just had to hope he got some kind of nasty infection or something that made his dick shrivel and fall off. Then again, in a weird-ass way, perhaps I should be thanking him. No guy had touched Rachel because Andy had been such an asshole, and so she was just for us. Knowing she was a virgin made my cock jump. Yeah, it was the caveman in me thinking that, wanting her all for myself, and Ethan. No one else would know what she looked like bare, see her eyes go blurry with her arousal, or hear her gasps of pleasure. Fuck no. They were all for the two of us, and while I didn't wish her the obvious hurt she felt at Andy's assault, it was assault, pure and simple. She was going to be taken care of now. Her first time would be perfect, not a quick college fumble. No, we'd make this good. We'd make it incredible. The responsibility was heady, but I was up for the challenge. She was so beautiful. No, not a swimsuit model, but better. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, showing off her high cheekbones, her full lips. She wore only a little makeup. She didn't need more. She was perfect as is. "One thing you're going to learn now, baby, is that we're protective. And possessive," Ethan added. "And a little obsessive." I stroked my finger down her soft cheek. "I admit, I've been obsessed with you since you walked up to me, all hot and sassy at the rodeo." Her shoulders relaxed and she let out a little laugh.
"Sassy? I am not sassy."
I winked at her, glad she was getting back to her usual self. I'd rather have her spitting fire than blinking back tears. I couldn't help but watch the soft sway of your hips beneath your jeans, the way your breasts were lush in your pale pink shirt as you approached me. Her mouth fell open.
"You remember what I wore?"
I nodded, continued to stroke her skin, slid my fingertip down her neck. "I remember everything about you."
"Oh."
"One thing, baby." Her green eyes lifted to meet mine. "I'm like a little boy with a toy sometimes. If Ethan gets to kiss you, then I want to kiss too." I had no idea how to approach a woman with blatant trauma in her past. We could go get some food, woo her over the next few weeks, even months, and hope she'd slowly come to trust us. But I didn't think trust was an issue. I'd seen the heat in her gaze at the rodeo. My words had turned her on and pissed her off. She just needed to be coaxed, led, literally handheld, until her mind caught up with her body and decided it wanted us. The corner of her mouth curled up.
"You feel neglected?"
she asked. I nodded. It's not fair he's gotten to taste those pretty lips and I haven't. Ethan laughed behind me.
Yes, I see.
She put a hand on my chest, and there was no doubt she could feel my heart beating frantically.
I definitely have to be fair with my kisses.
I lowered my head, kissed her, just a soft brushing of my lips over hers, then lifted my head. Okay? I asked, studying her closely. The tenseness of her muscles, her breathing, the color in her cheeks, everything. Her eyes fluttered open. She wasn't unaffected.
Oh, yes,
she breathed. I nudged the corner of her jaw with my nose. You're in control.
Will you just kiss me already?
She countered. I grinned then. Yes, ma'am. I kissed her again, this time with less caution and a whole lot more heat. I tucked my fingers into her hair, angled her head just the way I wanted. My tongue flicked over her lower lip and she gasped. I took that opportunity to plunge into her, to taste her fully for the first time. She whimpered and I felt the vibration of it in my palms. Ethan moved to stand behind her so she was between us, feeling both of us. His hand slid up and down her sides. When I closed my eyes, I couldn't see what he was doing, but I knew he was gentle, cautious. She didn't balk, didn't become scared. No, just the opposite. She melted into me like an ice cream cone in the sun. It was so good just to kiss. Something simple, although not all that innocent, made me harder than I'd ever been in my life. Knowing she wanted us, that she knew our need for her, made it even better. There was nothing between us now, except for our damn clothes. More? I asked, lifting my head finally. Ethan had slid the neckline of her shirt to the side to expose the line of her neck and part of her shoulder. He was licking and laving that tender skin. Her eyes were dark and stormy, her lips red and shiny.
More,
she breathed. I stepped back, yanked my shirt over my head, let it fall to the floor. Her eyes widened as she took in my bare chest, and I saw female appreciation. You can touch, I murmured. Please touch. Her hand came out, her fingers brushing over me, running through the crisp hair. When her finger flicked over the flat disc of my nipple, I hissed out a breath. Careful, sweetheart. He might blow. Rachel frowned. I reached down, cut my hard cock through my jeans, gave her a wicked smile. I'd be a tad embarrassed if I came in my pants. Her eyes watched my hand press hard, hoping to stave off my need to fill her.
I want to see,
she said, her voice shy. My eyes widened, but I didn't delay, standing to toe off my boots. If she wanted to see my dick, she'd see it. I wasn't modest. My hands flew to the button before sliding down the zipper, then working my pants off. I stripped my boxers at the same time, so I stood before her completely bare. My dick stood straight out, bobbing toward her. I had to grip the base, gave it a hard squeeze so I didn't come just by seeing the way her mouth opened. Her eyes flared.
Wow.
She pointed. Ethan moved to the bed, sat on the edge.
I don't think that's going to fit.
He'll fit. So will I, Ethan replied. You'll be nice and wet. I bet you are now, aren't you? She bit her lip, glanced at Ethan, nodded. Do you touch yourself, sweetheart? He asked.
Yes.
A pretty blush crept up her neck. Show us, I said, my voice all but a growl. The idea of her laying in her bed, thighs parted as she played with her pussy, had pre-cum seeping from my slit. If she said no, we would have stopped, but she had no idea what to do. It was our job to guide her. So while the two words were bossy and commanding, there wasn't any other way to get her to touch herself, except perhaps by tacking the word please onto the end. She didn't delay this time, didn't even glance at either of us with those wary eyes. Her fingers undid the top button of her jeans and slid down the zipper, giving her hand room to reach down inside. I could make out the lavender lace of her panties, but nothing else. Even so, having her hand down her pants was the most erotic thing I'd ever seen. She stood between us, her eyes flaring wide, most likely discovering how wet she really was. A little whimper escaped when she bumped her clit. "Make yourself come." Her eyes fell closed as her hand began to move in small circles. I glanced at Ethan, who'd opened his pants and was slowly stroking his cock. My balls ached at the sight of our girl. I wasn't going to last. No fucking way. "Stop," I groaned. Rachel's hands stilled and she looked at me, her eyes blurry, a little frown marring her brow. "I can't take any more. You're too damn gorgeous. Show me your fingers." She slipped them from beneath her panties, held them up. Ethan groaned as we saw how shiny they were. I gently grabbed her hand, lifted those fingers to my mouth, and licked them clean. Her eyes flared wide and her mouth opened as her taste coated my tongue. Yeah, I wasn't going to last. With Rachel, I wasn't sure if I could survive bedding her. Knowing we were her first, that we were going to take her bare, to fill her with our seed and make a baby, she was just too damn much.
Rachel. Oh my God. Ethan was sitting on the bed stroking himself, his really, really big self, and Matt had the look of a man about to blow. Just as he'd said. I was somehow pushing him to the brink of his sanity, of his need. But he hadn't tossed me on the bed, climbed on top of me. No, he'd only kissed me. And what a kiss it had been. But he licked my arousal from my fingers. The flick of his tongue, the sucking went right to my clit. My aching clit since they had me touch myself. I'd been close, too. Just standing before them, knowing they were watching, was so hot. Seeing them now like this was hot. Everything about them was hot. Matt said he couldn't take any more. Well, that made two of us. Yeah, I was a virgin and I was worried about how their huge dicks were going to fit inside me. But I wanted it. I wanted both of them. I wasn't afraid. They were being so damn cautious, I was starting to get frustrated. They were being too cautious now. I appreciated that about them. Their concern for me. That they wanted to make this perfect. But perfect meant we were naked and they were doing what they wanted with me. And yes, to me. I wanted these two men to tell me what to do. Knowing they were skilled at this would guide me to pleasure I'd never even imagined, had my fingers going to the hem of my shirt and lifting it up over my head. My ponytail got caught and I worked it free, let the shirt fall to the floor. Ethan swore under his breath as they both stared at my lavender-covered breasts. Thankfully, I'd put on a pretty bra and panty set this morning. I watched as Matt's fingers curled into fists at his sides, and Ethan's hand moved a tad faster up and down his dick. "Touch me," I said to them. They weren't going to do it unless I told them to. They wanted my consent, needed it. "Please." Matt held up a hand.
"Baby, you were assaulted, and now you've got two men who want you underneath them. I don't want you to panic."
They were too nice for their own good. Yeah, I'd been assaulted, and it had affected me for years. It seemed strange, even to me, that I wasn't worried I'd have a flashback or concerned their touches would make me upset. Not in the least. Perhaps it was just that every guy who tried to get close to me before just wasn't Ethan and Matt. Perhaps I'd been waiting for them. Underneath, I might be a virgin, but I'm pretty sure there are some ways to do this without me being beneath you.
Ethan's eyes flared with heat.
I bit my lip. Maybe we can start with those. Maybe we can start with you two, naked. Yeah, I was being bold. I never knew I had it in me. But they were giving me a safe place to be the real me. Matt was already naked, so he just grinned. But Ethan... Hell, I hadn't seen clothes fly off so fast before in my life. He struggled with his boots, and one thunked against the dresser when he tossed it with haste. And when they were naked before me... Wow. I ogled. What woman wouldn't when she had two gorgeous men blatantly eager for her? Matt was lean and tall, tightly corded muscles.
His chest hair was dark and it tapered to his navel and into a thin line, then went to the base of his cock. Wow, a really impressive cock. It was longer than Ethan's, but that wasn't saying much because Ethan was huge. I was worried he wouldn't fit. I couldn't imagine all of Matt fitting inside. Could it? I'd worry about that later. For now, I'd touch. They'd said I could. I stepped up to them, put a hand on each of their chests, felt the hot skin, the way their breaths caught. We're different men, sweetheart, Ethan said, his voice a rough rasp as I ran my palms over their nipples. But I promise we'll both make you come. Hard. I licked my lips, glanced down, let my fingers slide lower and lower still. When I was hovering just above their cocks, I glanced up at them through my lashes. Now, baby. Matt's growl was all I needed to grip each of them. Hot steel. They were so hard, yet the skin was so soft, almost like velvet. Both men groaned, and I felt a spurt of wetness coat my palms. I looked up at both of them once again. They were grinning. I told you I can't take any more. We're going to come in your hands instead of your sweet pussy if you keep it up. Matt's words had me letting go, and they groaned once more. It's time to see you, Ethan said. Can we get you out of the rest of your clothes? I nodded, and 4 hands went to work, deftly unhooking my bra, tugging my shoes off, then working my jeans over my hips. And when Ethan worked my panties down, with his teeth, I was done. Stick a fork in me, I was done. No, I giggled. Stick a cock in me. The two looked at me like I was slightly crazy. You okay? Ethan asked. I nodded. Yeah, this is just a little surreal. Both men stepped close. Matt settling behind me, his cock pressing against my lower back. Ethan in front of me. He tipped my chin up. We've barely touched you. They remedied that quickly enough. Matt's lips lowered to my neck, licked and kissed down it and across my shoulder. Ethan's hands cupped my breasts as he kissed me. I was lost. Too many hands, too many mouths. Within seconds I was lost in a swirl of pleasure. I was so much smaller than they were that Ethan dropped to his knees, and my breasts were at the perfect height for his mouth. He grinned up at me. I love that they're pink. Let's see if I can get those tips nice and cherry red from my mouth. My hands went to his head, instantly tangling in his hair when he sucked a nipple. Oh, my God. They hardened, one against his tongue and the other between his fingers as he played, pulled, even pinched. As he did that, Matt's hands were roaming, up and down my back, then lower and between my legs. When his fingers slid over my slit, my hips bucked. Dripping, he murmured in my ear. I still taste you. Ethan pulled off my nipple with a pop. I haven't tasted her yet, he grumbled. His hand slid down past my hips to my thighs, slid inward and pressed so I had to step wider. My turn. He didn't hesitate, didn't go gently. It seemed that they were done with being gentle, and I was fine with that. I didn't feel threatened, completely the opposite. I had no idea a tongue could be so incredible. Against my nipples, and now, shit, on my clit. Ethan was skilled, working me with his mouth as Matt slipped a finger inside of me from behind, curled it. So tight. I didn't release my hold on Ethan's head, only rocked my hips into his mouth and on Matt's finger. I'm going to come. Holy shit, this feels so good. Matt tisked me. If you can still make sentences, we're not doing it right. Ethan agreed with a murmur, the vibrations of it pushing me over the edge. I came, practically ripping Ethan's hair out as I held on for dear life. My cry split the air, and I was glad Matt hooked an arm about my waist. Otherwise, I would have melted to the floor like a puddle of goo. Yes, yes, yes! They continued their attentions, but softened them, gentled them until my orgasm ebbed. Wow, I said. Ethan moved back, and I finally released my hold. He laughed as he ran his hand over his head. sat back on his heels.
I love hearing you come, Matt murmured, kissing my shoulder.
We're not done, sweetheart, Ethan promised. That was just a warm-up. Oh yeah, I was all warmed up. My muscles were like pulled taffy, my skin damp with sweat. I had a feeling they were right. I wasn't going to be able to make sentences if they made me come like that again. And I had a feeling they would. Again and again. More, I said. In me now. God, please. Matt came around and stood beside Ethan. They studied me closely, perhaps ensuring I was still okay, which I was. So much more than just okay. You want to ride our cocks for your first time? Matt asked. I nodded. Perhaps that was best. Well, I did trust these two. Knew they weren't Andy. I didn't want to ruin it by any possible freak-out if they were pressing me into the mattress. Matt moved to the bed, yanked the covers and sheets back, sat down, legs extended, back against the headboard, cock sticking straight up. He curled a finger at me, beckoning me to him. They had barely touched me yet, and I wanted them. Ethan stood, then helped me up onto the bed, shifting my knees so I straddled Matt's hips, his cock directly beneath me. Wait, Matt said, leaning forward and taking my nipple into his mouth. He laved it with his tongue, tugging, then released it with a loud pop. He grinned. Oh, yeah. My inner walls clenched and released as he'd done that. Now I just felt empty. He put his hands on my hips as I shimmied, felt the broad head of his cock at my entrance. Take your time, baby. Nice and easy. Even though the tendons in Matt's neck were tight, he offered an easy smile, and I liked this almost playful air to him. Yeah, in about 10 seconds I was no longer going to be a virgin. That was a big deal. Doing it with both of them was a big deal. It was to them too, based on everything they'd said. But he wasn't making it serious now. I lowered myself and I began to open for him. My eyes widened, unused to the stretch. His finger had been in me, but that had been nothing compared to this. I lifted up, dropped again, thankful gravity was helping. I felt his fingers clench on my hips, then relax. The bed dipped and Ethan came to sit beside me. His hand slid up and down my back and he began to speak, dirty words that made me eager to have Matt in me. I love seeing you take Matt's cock. You're perfect for us. That's it, deeper. You can take all of him. Soon it will be my turn. My dick's so hard for you. I can't wait to mark you as mine, fill you with that baby we all want. Matt fit, but it was tight, really tight. My inner walls rippled and I shifted, adjusting to the feel of him. I was wet, crazily so, and it had been much easier than expected. It was only when I was sitting directly on his lap, my butt resting on his bare thighs, that I realized it hadn't hurt. I thought it was supposed to be painful, I said, my voice coming out in little pants. That there was blood and thinking of England. Matt was gritting his teeth. I'm thinking of England right now, trying not to come. Baby, you're squeezing me, and I'm not going to last. I laughed, came up a touch, dropped back down. Oh, I said, my eyes going wide. That felt good. Not every woman has a hymen, or it was torn at some point. Does it matter? Ethan asked. I lifted and lowered myself again, this time a little further out and a little harder back down. I cried out. No, it doesn't matter at all. I breathed. Fuck, Matt whispered. I'm just glad there's no pain. Only pleasure, right? I nodded, my ponytail tickling my back. Shit, Ethan added when I started to find a rhythm. I could feel my breasts bouncing, but I didn't care. I was just chasing the pleasure, grinding my clit against Matt. You're gorgeous, sweetheart. Come for us. I fucked with abandon. Even though I'd never done it before, I was getting the hang of it pretty fast. I knew it felt good and I wanted it. But I wasn't getting there, and it seemed that Ethan knew because I felt fingers on my clit. I opened my eyes, turned my head, and looked at him. That's it. Now you can come. We'll both get you there.
I began to move again, and it didn't take long, not with Ethan's expert touch. He certainly knew his way around a clit. My thighs quivered, my inner walls clenched, and my nipples tightened. I gave over to the pleasure, arched my back, cried out. I felt Matt's grip tighten, felt him thicken within me. He held me down, thrust his hips up, and groaned. He was so deep I felt the hot spurts of his seed, knew he was feeling the same bliss I was. I'd given it to him, made him feel that way. It was hard to catch my breath, and for some strange reason, the tips of my ears were tingling.
My turn,
Ethan said. I could hear the need in his voice. I'd come twice, and he was still waiting. Glancing down at Matt, I saw that he was no longer tense, but had a sly grin on his face, his cheeks flushed.
Be a good girl and give Ethan what he wants.
I bit my lip, glanced at Ethan, then nodded. Matt easily lifted me up and off of him, and I hissed, every spot inside me awake and eager for more. I felt his seed slipping from me, and a drop fell onto Matt's thigh. Ethan growled, grabbed me from Matt, and flipped me onto my back. I gasped at the manhandling, but liked it. He stood, grabbed my ankle, and tugged me so I was sideways on the bed, Matt moving out of the way. Ethan didn't release my ankle, but took the other one, too. I was open for him, my butt right at the edge of the bed.
Okay?
He asked. Even rock hard and blatantly eager to fuck, he was still thinking of me first. I nodded, then said, yes. I wanted him to hear it, to know I wanted him. He growled, bent his knees, and aligned himself. He slid in one long, slow stroke. I was a little sore, definitely tender for Matt, but I was also more prepared. I was wet not only with my juices, but Matt's seed. Ethan stretched me open just like Matt had, and I felt even more well-claimed. His fingers gripped my ankles, first putting them by his hips as he began to fuck in a steady pace.
So tight, so perfect, sweetheart,
he said. His dark eyes met mine, and I couldn't help but nod again. It was perfect.
One of these days we'll take you together. Matt in your pussy, and I'll take your virgin ass.
I moaned at the thought of both of them inside me at the same time. This angle was completely different than when I straddled Matt. Ethan was rubbing over completely new places, and when he brought both of my ankles up to his right shoulder so I was a little angled, I swore my eyes rolled back in my head. Fuck, I mumbled. It was so good. I was really glad for all those yoga classes, but I didn't have any brain cells left to think about anything but coming again. I barely felt the bed shift before a mouth closed over my nipple. My fingers went right to Matt's hair as if to anchor me to something. When Ethan shifted my ankles again so one of them was on each of his shoulders, I looked up at him. I'm gonna come.
Good girl. Come and I'll go with you.
Matt's head came up and he watched me.
We're like randy teenagers. We've got all night. Don't worry. Next time we won't be on such a hair trigger.
I heard him. I processed his words. Barely. Then Ethan pounded into me and I came. Thoughts fled, words died. I couldn't even scream, there was no sound. Every muscle in my body tensed, sweat broke out over my skin, and I was gone. It was possible I blacked out for a moment, but I couldn't be sure. All I knew was Ethan came too, with a very fierce and possessive shout of my name. Before I could catch my breath, I was tucked beneath the covers, my men on either side of me.
Sleep,
one of them whispered.
You'll need it. We're not done with you. Not even close. Chapter 10. Matt. Life was good. Really good. In fact, for the last 3 weeks, life had never been better. I could honestly say that for the first time since I walked away from professional baseball, I was happy. Content in a way I'd never thought I'd be, not even when I'd had my dream job. And it was all thanks to Rachel. We'd made our hours in that Helena hotel room, and we'd spent every night, and often during the day, doing it again and again. I was insatiable around her, and thankfully she was the same way. She may have been a virgin, but she wasn't shy. No, she'd been bold and playful, curious and wild right from the start. So far, Operation Knock Up Rachel hadn't been a success, at least not that we knew of, but we sure as hell enjoyed trying. And trying. We'd settled into a routine. While she hadn't moved in with us yet, Ethan and I shared a cabin on the ranch, one that we'd had built in preparations for someday having a big family. She had been spending the night more and more. She liked waking up between us, and I liked waking up and rolling her beneath me. I was content enough to forget I'd applied months ago for a job as a pitching coach for the San Francisco Giants, but they'd called me out of the blue, and it had brought up the memories of my time playing pro ball. The thrill, the highs and lows, the physical strain. I missed it all. Over the last week, I'd spoken with a few of their coaches, and they seemed interested in me. I couldn't be a player anymore, but being part of the organization made me feel alive again, in a way I hadn't felt since I blew out my shoulder. I hadn't talked to Ethan about it yet, or Rachel. There was no need to go there unless it became real. If it did, we'd handle it. Not that I didn't enjoy working the ranch. I did. It was my property brought to life. People enjoyed their visit, saw the Montana I'd grown up to love, and lately, I enjoyed it a whole lot more now that I could fuck our haughty office manager any time I wanted. Yeah, it was petty and chauvinistic sounding, but Rachel could take advantage of her two bosses any time she wished. The woman in question came into my office looking sexy and sweet and fucking luscious as hell. It had been surprisingly easy to transform from platonic bosses to her boss boyfriends. We set some ground rules from the get-go, some to make Rachel's life easier, and others to keep things interesting. She liked to play, and we were happy to oblige. One rule was that she was no longer allowed to wear jeans in the office, only skirts and dresses for our girl. Not because we'd fancied up our dress code, but because jeans made it too damn hard to fuck her whenever and wherever we wanted. As Ethan so accurately pointed out to Rachel, it took a lot of tries to get pregnant. If we were serious about this baby-making business, we had to take full advantage of every opportunity. It was a hard job, but somebody had to do it. No one liked this rule more than Rachel. It turned out our little virgin was a vixen in disguise. Now that she'd figured out how good it could be, she couldn't get enough. It was only 3 of us in the back office. While there was staff for the front desk and other aspects of Hawk's Landing, the administrative area was our domain. It wasn't completely private, but that was what an office door was for. She smiled as she came toward my desk holding up a notepad, yet placing the little pink message slip on my desk. "You had a phone call." With my hand raised, I stopped her. "Hold it right there, missy. Turn around and close the door." I tried for my sternest tone, loving the way her cheeks turned pink the moment she realized I was in boss mode. That was what she called it when I got all commanding and bossy in the office. Or in the bedroom. Yeah, she liked to be dominated by her 2 men, and she liked playing up the sexy secretary role to the hilt. She did as I commanded, then turned back around. I happened to know she got turned on instantly when we went into boss mode. A wet pussy never lied. Hell, I'd guess she was already wet for me right now and I'd barely even begun. I nodded toward the cute skirt she wore. It came to just above her knees. Nothing immodest or inappropriate. Lifted up. She bit her lip but didn't protest. Her fingers gripped the hem and she hitched it up slowly, offering me a teasing glimpse of her creamy thighs. Shit. She'd learn how to be quite the tease in just a matter of weeks. Give her another month and Ethan and I would be royally screwed. So totally crazy in lust we'd be too hard to walk. When she hitched it up over her hips, I caught sight of her lacy white panties and I shifted in my desk chair. The sight of her, skirt hoisted, panties visible, was so sexy. Thankfully, the bulge in my pants was hidden behind my desk. I cleared my throat and looked up at her with raised brows. Her blush deepened, but a small smile played at her lips. "Sorry, I forgot." I shook my head in feigned disappointment. No panties was another rule we'd instituted, when even tugging off those silky lace numbers became too much of a hindrance. We'd ripped more off of her than we could count. When she got upset at us for ruining so many, we told her she shouldn't wear them anymore. What did we say about panties? They only get in the way. If you want us to keep that pussy filled up with our seed, you can't be wearing them. She nodded. "I know. I'm sorry." She didn't look sorry at all, and I tried not to grin. Panties would not be keeping us from filling her pussy. I nodded towards her panties. Lose them. She tugged them down over her hips, and I groaned at the sight before me. Sweet Jesus, I'd never tire of that sight. Her pussy was bare except for a neat little strip of groomed dark hair. I couldn't miss the pink folds or the way they were glistening with her juices, and our seed from when we fucked her this morning before she came into the office. Ethan walked into the room and startled Rachel, quickly dropping her hands. I waved my finger for her to lift them back up. He took one look at our woman with her skirt hitched up to her waist and stopped, turned and locked the door. I was sure the desire written all over his face was an echo of mine. We couldn't get enough of this woman. He didn't even stop to ask what we were doing or how our mornings were going. Ethan dropped his stack of paperwork on the edge of my desk and went to Rachel, dropping to his knees and burying his face between her thighs. She cried out, her head dropping back as her hands let go of the skirt so she could grip his nape. Shit. I was so turned on watching him eat her out I had to whip my cock out of my jeans and stroke it to find some relief. Her moans and whimpers were the stuff of my dreams. Ethan made a groaning sound as he buried his tongue in her pussy. Fuck, I was jealous. I couldn't wait to taste her again. It had been a full 12 hours since she sat on my face, and that was just too damn long. Her orgasm was fucking fantastic to watch. She was so responsive, so quick to pleasure. If I were keeping time, I'd say it took less than a minute for Ethan to get her off. She bit her lip to stifle her sounds. While we weren't near any guests, we definitely didn't want to share what we did with Rachel with anyone. When she stopped riding his face, Ethan pulled back, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and turned to me with a wicked grin. Was I interrupting something? Rachel looked dazed and blissed out, her cheeks flushed, more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. But there was something I'd been dying to do, a fantasy I suspected she harbored, but I'd been afraid to go there before she was ready. But she'd gone from virgin to vixen faster than fast pitch down the middle. I watched her fall back against my desk, her legs spread wide as a silly grin spread across her face. Yeah, she was ready. You were interrupting, I said to Ethan. My gaze never left Rachel. Our girl here forgot one of the rules and wore her panties. I flicked my gaze to Ethan's before he looked to Rachel, winked. He made a tisking sound that would have made a school librarian proud. His voice grew stern. Clearly he knew where I was going with this. We made the rules for a reason, Rachel, so we can give you what you need. She straightened on the desk, nodding her understanding. I'm sorry, she said softly. I looked at her pussy and saw that she was wet all over again like I knew she would be. Sorry is not going to cut it, I said, coming around the desk to stand before her, arms folded over my chest. We need to teach you a lesson. Her eyes flared wide, but I winked at her, just as Ethan had, to let her know we were playing. Somewhat. Oh, she'd get her lesson, but only if she wanted one. All she had to do was agree and we'd pleasure her, in an entirely new way. She bit her lip, tilted her head. What kind of lesson? She asked coyly. Bingo. Bend over the desk and lift the skirt, Ethan told her. She looked at him, then turned and went down on her forearms. She looked up at me through her lashes, and I arched a brow at her. Reaching back with one hand, she tossed up her skirt so the pale globes of her perfect ass were visible. Fucking me isn't a punishment, she said. I continued to stroke my dick as Ethan brought his hand down, spanking her. The crack reverberated in the room, and I watched as she stiffened. Her eyes widened. She then glanced over her shoulder at him. Ethan, she whispered. People could hear. That was true. What we did with Rachel wasn't for public knowledge. Ethan grunted, rubbing his palm over the flesh. I like the way my handprint is all hot and pink. Then you'll get your spanking later. I reached into one of my desk drawers, pulling out the butt plug and lube I'd been keeping waiting for the right time to play. We'd take her together. Ethan had mentioned it. We hadn't done anything about preparing her. Until now. I tossed one, then the other to Ethan, Rachel's eyes following. In the meantime, we'll put this tiny plug in you. Butt stuff is my punishment? She asked, her voice wary. Ethan moved to the side of the desk so she could see him without wrenching her neck. She remained in place, sprawled over my desk so nicely. We both shook our heads. Hell no. You're going to love it. As I said, your punishment is a spanking, later in our cabin. But I'll work this plug in, then fuck you. I'll have my turn too, I added, ensuring she knew we'd both fill her up again. Then you'll keep that plug in until dinner. She came up then, her skirt falling back in place. A shame. What? Ethan grinned. You won't forget who you belong to, will you? Our plug in your ass and our seed dripping down your thighs? I don't need that to remember, she countered, grumbling. Ethan moved behind her, gently pressed her back down over my desk, tossed up her skirt. He put the plug beside her on the desk and he flipped open the lid on the lube. When he let a small amount drizzle down into the crack of her ass, she squirmed. A little eep escaped. Yet you can't remember to forgo panties. She pursed her lips, probably realizing she had no argument. I grinned at her, then winked, knowing we were still playing. But when her eyes flared wide when he pressed against her virgin hole, we weren't playing quite as much anymore. It was important she was prepared. We never wanted to hurt her. I stroked my dick as I watched Ethan begin to open her ass up. She squirmed and breathed as he did so, but I could tell by looking at her she was aroused by it. When he grabbed the plug, lubed it up, and then carefully filled her with it, she was downright whimpering. Be right back, Ethan said, heading to my private bathroom to clean up. I stood then, went around the desk, saw the little purple handle of the plug parting her pert cheeks, her glistening pussy lips, and the pink handprint. Just watching your ass get filled has me close to coming. This is going to be hard and fast. Yes, she breathed. I stepped behind her, carefully sliding right into her eager pussy. She was so wet, and I knew some of our seed from earlier still coated her nice and deep. I groaned, and she stifled a whimper. Ethan came back out. I thought I was first. You got to play, I said, gripping her hips. I was going to come, and I had only been in her 10 seconds. There was no rhythm to my motions, only the loud slap of flesh on flesh as I took her. I bumped the plug and pressed it in each time, pushing her to the brink. It was when her inner walls clenched and squeezed that I came, my fingers all but leaving bruises on her hips, and I ground my teeth together to stifle the shout of pleasure. My breathing was ragged when I pulled out, watched my seed slip from her. Ethan nudged me out of the way as he didn't want to waste time fucking her next. When he settled deep, she came, her fingers slipping over the wood of my desk, her back arched, her mouth open in a silent scream. Ethan rode her orgasm as he fucked her, hard, deliberate, and with a base need to plant a baby in her. I instantly got hard at the thought of all that seed making a baby. He came on a short grunt, pulled out and began to work the seed that was slipping from her back in. The play of his fingers had her coming again, and she slumped on the desk, well and truly used and loved. We tucked our dicks back in our pants, set ourselves to rights as she recovered. I helped her back up to her feet, held her arm as she caught her balance, her skirt falling back in place. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glossy, and I couldn't help but grin. That wasn't so bad, was it? The plug's nice and small, I said. Ethan leaned in, murmured in her ear. Imagine that plug being replaced with my cock. She bit her lip, looked up at him. I patted my hand on her skirt-covered ass, felt the handle of the plug. Back to work, I said, grabbing her notebook and steering her toward the door. I couldn't help but chuckle, knowing she wasn't going to get anything done for the rest of the day. After falling back into my desk chair, I could have taken a nap after that playful bout of fucking, but even while pleasured, Rachel's brain kicked back into work mode. That message, she pointed to the pink slip she'd brought in. You got a call from some guy at the San Francisco Giants. Ethan's eyes widened as he settled into the chair in front of my desk. He didn't look satisfied any longer either. The Giants? He asked. He said something about flying out there, Rachel added. Her voice and her expression were filled with a question. Aw, hell. This wasn't how I wanted to tell them about the new job. The potential new job. That was why I'd kept my phone calls to myself. It wasn't a done deal, and if I did get it, which was a big if, I'd planned to break the news carefully to avoid a moment exactly like this one. I scratched my head as they stared at me. Rachel looked expectant, hopeful even. Ethan looked ready to punch me in the jaw. "Look, I can explain," I said. "It all started 6 months ago, well before you, well before the rodeo even. It was an opportunity, and I looked into it. That's it." "Yeah, but it's in San Francisco," Ethan countered. I nodded. "It's a way of making it back to the big leagues. I don't have the job, it's just talk at this point." "And being flown to California," Ethan added. He definitely didn't like this possibility. Rachel was still wearing her soft smile, but her eyes were filled with a sadness that made my chest ache. I stood, went to her, took her hands in mine. "Baby, this doesn't change anything. I still want to be with you. I want our family." She nodded quickly and her smile grew, although brittly. "I'm happy for you, Matt. I really am." Before I could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. Rachel went to it, opened it. One of the front desk receptionists spoke briefly to her. Rachel turned. "New guests need some help. Let me deal with them and I'll be back." I stared after her even when the door swung closed. Much as I hated to see her go without resolving this, I was glad she wouldn't be around to hear Ethan and me argue. I slowly turned, bracing myself. "How could you keep this a secret?" he shouted. Yep, there it was. "Ethan, just let me explain." "When were you going to tell me?" he asked. "When were you going to tell Rachel?" I tensed at that. Things with Rachel were so good but so new. She was just starting to feel safe with us, and we were all adjusting to the idea of potentially being parents and a true family. Hell, she had a plug in her ass for the first time. It had seemed too soon to broach the subject of moving or long-distance relationships, the only two options if this dream job became a reality. I just hadn't really expected it to. "I was going to tell you both," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I only heard from them for the first time last week, and I didn't want to bring it up unless I got it. Otherwise it would just stress everyone out for no reason, like now." "Stress everyone out?" Ethan repeated. "Of course it would. It has. We finally have everything we ever wanted, and you're about to ruin it." "I'm not ruining anything." "Jesus, don't be so melodramatic." That was the wrong thing to say. His face turned beet red, and for a second I thought he might have a stroke. "Matt, we're trying for a baby. Hell, we just fucked her over your desk. We've taken her bare from the start, 4 weeks. Do you understand what that means?" I had to tread carefully. "Listen, man, I know what I signed up for with you and Rachel, and I'm not backing out on that." "Obviously, since you just fucked her." He pursed his lips, said nothing more. His silence felt like judge, jury, and executioner. Damn it. He wasn't even giving me a chance to explain. My anger started to rise to his level. This was exactly why I hadn't told him in the first place. I knew he'd overreact. "Have I ever bailed on my responsibilities?" I asked, running my hand through my hair. "Give me some credit. If I said I'd commit to you and Rachel and help raise a child, then I'll do it." Some of the tension eased from Ethan, but he still looked frustrated. "You just don't understand. You've got everything you want right here." "No," I interrupted. "You have everything you want. You never wanted to leave Bridgewater. Running a ranch has always been your dream, but it wasn't mine." Shit. That came out wrong. Ethan looked like I'd just sucker punched him. I dropped my head back with a groan, stared at the ceiling. "Look, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. I love what we have here, the business, our relationship with Rachel. It's perfect." Ethan studied me quietly. "But," he finally prompted, "but you've got to understand. I lost everything I'd spent my whole life working toward with one bad pitch. While I love what I've got right now, pro baseball was always my dream. And I had it. For a little while, I was on top of the world. Is it so wrong that I want to be a part of that again?" He was quiet, and I knew better than to push him. "What about us?" he asked. "The 3 of us. How does our family fit into your dreams? I ran a hand through my hair again because that was the million-dollar question and the one I didn't have an answer for. I don't know, but I'll find a way to make it work. I promise you that. He nodded, but he seemed far from happy with this conversation. When he started to walk away, I stopped him. Where are you going? He didn't turn back around to face me. I'm going to find Rachel and make sure she's not upset. She's got enough on her plate without worrying that one of her future husbands has decided to take off on her. I winced, but he didn't see it. I'll talk to her. He shook his head as he reached for the door. I'll go. You've got a plane to catch.
Chapter 11. Rachel. It was my own fault, really. I shouldn't have eavesdropped. My mother would have told me I couldn't expect to hear something good when I was listening in on a private conversation. I hadn't meant to linger outside the door, but their raised voices made me freeze as I came back from dealing with guests.
Have I ever bailed on my responsibilities? I heard Matt's voice loud and clear through the door. If I said I'd commit to you and Rachel and help raise a child, then I'll do it.
My heart plummeted at those words. It was the tone of his voice that did it. He sounded so bitter, so resentful. This was everything I'd feared. If I was being honest, I'd known what was coming the moment Matt told us about the job possibility. I'd seen the way his eyes lit up with excitement when he talked about getting back to professional baseball, and I couldn't blame him. He'd been really good, famous even for his pitching record. I'd gotten to know him well over the past few weeks, well enough that getting back to his former world meant everything to him. Why wouldn't he want to go back to a life of glamour, excitement, and beautiful women throwing themselves at his feet? A numbness set in as I moved away from the door. I didn't want to hear any more. I didn't need to. What I heard had been enough for me to see the reality that was staring me in the face. I was a burden, and if I told them about the baby I was carrying, the baby would add to their burden 1,000,000 times over. I groaned at the odd feeling of the plug in my ass. Tears stung the back of my eyes as I gathered my purse and headed directly for the bathroom. They'd put it in as part of sexy times. That's what I called our playing, but I wasn't in the mood for it now. I went into the stall, winced as I tugged it out. After tossing the stupid thing in the trash, I washed my hands, studied my face, then went straight to the parking lot. Yeah, this sucked. I didn't think to tell anyone I was leaving. What was the point? I'd have to quit my job anyways. There was no way I could keep working for Ethan once this relationship came to an end. Relationship. No, that's not what this was, and I should have seen that all along. It was more like a tryst. My bosses and I had sex. A lot. In those sexy times? Yeah, they'd been fun, but that was it. Nothing more. I clutched my stomach in a vain attempt to keep the nausea at bay. Sure, they talked a good game about knowing I was the one, but I should have known they'd get tired of me. For the past 3 weeks, I'd felt like I was living in a dream world. Everything had been so great, so perfect. Too perfect. Almost too good to be true. And today I'd landed back in reality with a thud. Not only did I find out that I was having a baby, their baby, but I discovered the harsh reality. I'd be raising it alone. I should have just gotten involved with the damn turkey baster and the donor sperm. My heart wouldn't be hurting right now if I had. I got into my car and drove home in a daze, still too numb to cry as my brain replayed Matt's words. I almost wished he'd been a jerk about it. In a way, it would have been easier to end things if he'd said he was bailing outright, that he didn't care about me or any potential baby. But that wasn't Matt's way any more than it was Ethan's. They were good men, solid, dependable, loyal, and loving. If they made a commitment, they honored it, even if it stopped them from pursuing their dreams. I loved that about them, but I refused to be the person holding them back. It wasn't fair, to them or to me. And it certainly wouldn't be fair to this child. I was the one who'd wanted a baby, and I'd intended to raise a baby alone up until Ethan and Matt insisted otherwise. If Matt wanted to go back to the pros, I wasn't going to stop him. I wanted him happy, not shackled to me. When I parked my car in the driveway, I sat there for a few moments and focused on my breathing. To think, Just this morning I'd been so excited. I'd taken a pregnancy test before work and had planned on telling them over dinner. They were virile. They definitely had strong swimmers, because it had probably happened that first night in the hotel room in Helena. I'd been ovulating then, the reason for that specific day to go to the sperm bank. I should be thankful I hadn't told them yet. There was no way Matt would leave for San Francisco if he knew they had a child on the way. He was far too noble to walk out on a pregnant woman. His dreams would wither and die while I grew big and fat. That was why I had to walk away from them. I couldn't hold them back in my dream. The baby would do that. The tears started then. I dropped my head onto the steering wheel and let them come, mourning the fantasy life I let myself believe could be real. But it wasn't real, and it never could be. I'd originally planned to raise a child alone, and that was what I'd do. I should be thrilled I was pregnant, and I was nothing but sad. When the tears subsided, I went into the house and started making a plan for a new life, one without the baby's fathers. When Ethan showed up on my doorstep 2 hours later, I couldn't say I was surprised. My men were nothing if protective. They looked out for me, and I knew once they noticed I'd left the office, one of them would come looking for me. I tried to smile as I opened the door, but I could see right away he wasn't fooled.
"What's wrong?"
he asked. The concern in his eyes tore at my heart. I didn't want to do this. The selfish part of me wanted to cling to Ethan and ask him to tell me it would be all right, and he would. He'd make promises and reassure me until I was comforted. But his kind words wouldn't change anything, not in the long run. So instead of running toward him, I backed away, gesturing for him to have a seat on the couch. He ignored the offer and came closer until he stroked my cheek gently.
"Rachel, you're making me worried. Were you crying?"
I swallowed down the voice that was begging me to reconsider. It was time to be selfless. These men deserved that much. They'd given me the baby I'd always wanted. The least I could do was give them their freedom. "I'm sorry to leave so suddenly," I said, my voice soft. I think I need to give my notice." That wasn't nearly as cool and confident as I'd intended, but it did the trick. Ethan's eyes widened with surprise and concern. In that moment, my heart ached for him. He was so strong, so protective, yet very vulnerable. It was easy to forget he had feelings too, that this would hurt him.
"Why? Is it something we did?"
I shook my head. "No, I just think it would make things difficult if I stayed and—"
"If you don't want to work, that's fine,"
Ethan interrupted. His hands moved to my arms and he pulled me up against him. He felt so good, so strong, and I reveled in the feel, his scent one last time.
"Matt and I make more than enough to cover your expenses, if you want to take some time to prepare for the baby."
His grin was only slightly strained.
"It's just a matter of time before you get pregnant. You know that, right? You need to be patient, that's all."
I nodded, my chest aching at the lie of a mission hanging between us. I wanted to tell him about the baby, to see his reaction when I told him he was going to be a father, but that would only make this harder. I had to look away. "Ethan, I don't need to leave my job for the baby. I need to leave because I can't keep sleeping with you and Matt." Ethan's shock was quickly followed by confusion and frustration.
"What? Why? Did something happen? Were we too rough with the plug?"
I shook my head again. Understanding dawned quickly.
"Is this about Matt and the job offer?"
Before I could reply, he hurried on.
"He won't be gone for long, sweetheart. He'll be back by the weekend, and then the three of us can talk this out and figure out how it will work."
The struggle to hold back tears rendered me temporarily unable to speak. I cleared my throat and said what needed to be said. "I don't need to talk this out, Ethan. I'm ending it with both of you. For good." Guilt and sadness made the nausea worsen to the point where I had to clench my fists and bite my lip to keep from doubling over. I had to continue reminding myself that this was in their best interests. Ethan might not like it now, but he would when he found the right woman. Matt would be free to pursue his dreams in San Francisco. This was for the best. That was poor consolation when faced with Ethan's obvious pain.
"Don't do this. Matt's been an ass before, and he'll be one again. That doesn't mean it's over." "No," I said, with a finality I didn't want to feel. They would move hell and earth to make this work between us, because they'd made a promise, and these men would never shirk their responsibilities. I'd have to do it for them. "I don't want to work it out." I was amazed by how calm I sounded, almost like my heart wasn't breaking and shattering into a million pieces at our feet. His brows drew together as he searched my face, looking for what I didn't know. His eyes were filled with pain and confusion, frustration and anger. "You were fine a few hours ago. Playful, even. Why didn't you say anything then?" I shrugged, glanced at the arm of my couch. It was a good question. What woman would let two men spank her and do butt stuff if she wanted to break it off? I would have given anything to ease his pain, but that would only make this harder. "What about the baby?" For a second my heart stopped. How did he know? "What if you're pregnant?" he continued. His desperation clawed at my chest, making my heartache that much more painful. "You can't raise a baby alone." I stood up a little straighter and looked him in the eye. "I can, and if it happens, I will. That was my original plan, remember? It was you and Matt who decided you wanted to be involved, but now I'm telling you it's not necessary." "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's for the best, for all of us, and it was, for them at least." It was his turn to shake his head. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking defiant. "I'm not giving up on you, Rachel Andrews. I'm not giving up on us or the family we talked about." He looked so earnest it hurt. I opened my mouth to argue with him further, make it clear that my decision was final. The words never got out. My stomach chose that moment to turn over, making me clamp my mouth shut and take a deep breath, praying that the nausea would pass. Ethan reached out in concern. "You look really pale. Are you all right?" "No." I was so not all right. Nothing about the situation felt right. I finally had my baby, but I was losing the two men who could make a family with me. I'd finally found love, and now I was forced to drive it away or risk hurting everyone. "I didn't sleep last night," I lied. "I just need to lie down." He nodded, helping me into a chair. "Fine. I'll leave for now, and I'll let you get some sleep." I kept my head down to hide the tears that were forming all over again. I couldn't see his expression, but I heard the hard determination in his voice when he continued. "Don't think I'm accepting this, sweetheart. I'll give you time. That's it. We promised you we'd prove to you that this is the real deal, and I mean to make good on that promise." Matt. This should have been a great day, a day for celebration. Here I was back in the big leagues. The assistant coach who'd been tasked with showing me around before my final interview led the way through the empty locker room. Everything about it felt familiar. The lingering smell of sweat and bleach, the distant sound of weights clanging from a training room. In a weird way, it felt like coming home. Except that it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. The coach showed me some of the new state-of-the-art training equipment, and I made the appropriate sounds of admiration. Or at least I hoped I did. Everything looked exactly the same, yet completely different. Years away had changed my perspective, changed me. My mind was still fixed on the way I'd left things back in Bridgewater. The whole job thing happened so fast. The flight had been booked, and I'd had no choice but to all but run to the plane if I wanted to make it to the meeting. There had been no chance to resolve things before I left, and I felt like shit about it. I knew Ethan was pissed, and Rachel? Shit. I tried their phones, but they weren't answering, and I was sick of leaving voicemails. A full day had gone by with no word from either of them, and I knew something was wrong, and I was, once again, the cause. Part of me wanted to jump on the next plane to get back and make things right, at least make them understand. I felt uncomfortable in my skin, as if I couldn't sit still. I was anxious, and it was really fucking hard to be on for the interviewers. I'd made it through several interviews and had one more left. It was the final meeting, the one that would decide my fate, our fate. I tried to get excited as the guy told me about the day-to-day tasks of the pitching coach position. I asked informed questions and furrowed my brow so it looked like I was concentrating on his answers. But the moment he started talking, my brain went off on a tangent of doubts and questions, while my gut screamed at me to leave, and my heart felt like there was a chunk missing. All three seemed determined to sabotage this meeting, to sabotage what I'd wanted for years, to be back in the majors. I almost missed it when the coach asked if I was ready for the final interview. "Of course," I said, trying to muster up the appropriate enthusiasm, slapping the guy on the back. He might have been fooled, but I was not. As I followed him to the conference room, my feet felt like lead. Why did it feel like I was heading in for a root canal without Novocaine? My hesitation had nothing to do with nerves. Nah, the job was mine. I knew it. In fact, I wished I was nervous. At least that would be a sign that I was excited about this job, that I really wanted it. Because I did want it, didn't I? This was my break I'd been wanting ever since I blew out my shoulder. I'd wanted a chance back in, and I had it. It was right there. I just had to reach out and take it. Yet somehow being here didn't feel like it did in my dreams. In all those late nights wishing I could be back in this exact spot, I felt like I was trying to go back in time and relive a great period of my life. I was left alone in the room to wait on the head honchos who would have the final say. The longer I sat there, the more I itched to leave. How could I focus on answering interview questions when all I could think about was what was going on at home? Was Rachel running the office in one of her summer dresses? While she would be bare-assed underneath, there was nothing showy or inappropriate about my girl. No, she was sweet on the outside and a sexy siren for only me and Ethan. And yet the last time I saw her, she was upset with me. She knew what a call from the Giants meant. To her, it probably meant I was going to bail. That was what it felt like sitting here, that I'd bailed. On her, on us, on the family we were trying to make. The executives filed in, and I got up to greet them, shaking hands, settling across from me at the big conference table. I didn't want to go through with this, and it wasn't entirely because I was impatient to be home fixing things with Ethan and Rachel. Something about this whole experience didn't feel right. One of the men launched into a spiel about the team and the position. It all sounded too good to be true. Big salary, spring training in Arizona, months off in the off-season, back in the dugout as a coach. When he was done, he asked a simple question. "So, Matt, why do you want this job?" It was an easy warm-up question, one I should have been able to answer in my sleep. I'd known the answer all these years, waited for the moment when I could give it. But now that my chance was here, I found myself staring at the man as my mind went blank. Why did I want the job? So I could be in the majors again? So I could watch on the sidelines as men younger and in better shape lived out my dream career that had been cut short? For the first time since I got the call saying they were interested in me, I let myself imagine what it would really be like if I took the job. I'd be on the road all the time, which was fine when I'd been young and single. But now, Arizona didn't seem too appealing. Now it would mean leaving behind Rachel and eventually our children. That thought brought with it a physical ache. I didn't want to be away from her these few days in California. How would I feel when it was spring training and then the season with over 150 games? And not one of those games happened in Montana. I'd never had anything to sacrifice. Until now. Was it worth it? For so long I thought my dream was baseball, but I'd never stopped to notice that somewhere along the way, my dreams had changed. I'd fucking changed. I pictured Rachel walking into my office with those warm hazel eyes and that sweet knowing smile. She was my dream now, my every fantasy. And somewhere along the way her dreams had become mine, and definitely her fantasies. I couldn't wait to hear her tell us she was pregnant. Couldn't wait to watch her belly grow. Sure, they might be tame dreams compared to my former aspirations, but that didn't make them any less real. Hell, they were more real. What did I get out of the majors besides a bum shoulder? Nothing. With Rachel, I got everything. And Hawk's Landing. I'd always thought of it as Ethan's dream, but at some point it had become mine too. I loved working the land and having the space and freedom that came with living in Bridgewater. I liked sharing it with the guests, letting them see how special Montana was. There was nothing appealing about the idea of moving back to a major city. The noise, the lights, the crowds, Shit, I hadn't seen rush hour in years. The only place I really wanted to be was the place I'd just left, Bridgewater. I'd spent so long being bitter about what I'd lost, pissed that my shoulder had given out on me before I was ready. I never stopped to see what I'd gained. The executives were watching me, waiting for an answer as the silence stretched into awkward territory. I didn't care. I not only wasn't nervous, I didn't care if they were impressed or not. I didn't care, period. Not about this job and not about baseball. Not any longer. All that mattered was getting back home and making things right with the two people in the world that truly mattered. My chair scraped against the floor as I pushed it back and stood, causing more than one executive to raise his brows in surprise. "Sorry, gentlemen," I said. "I have some place to be." As I headed out of the office and back to my hotel to pack, there were no regrets about my decision. If anything, I felt free. A load had been lifted off my shoulders. Maybe it was some of that old bitterness about the way my career had ended, or maybe it was just the relief of knowing that I was finally heading home, to my family. Chapter 12. Ethan. This was torture. 2 days had passed and there was no getting through to Rachel. I tried everything, but the woman had gone ice cold on me, shutting me out. She wouldn't answer her door, wouldn't answer my phone calls. The worst part was I was fighting for her on my own. Matt had finally called back, but by then I hadn't wanted to talk with him. Telling him over the phone that Rachel had just ended things with us just seemed cruel. Besides, I'd hoped that I could convince her to give us another chance before he returned. But he was still off on his trip and things with Rachel were worse than ever. I'd reached a dead end on how to get through to her. At the office, she'd given her 2 weeks' notice. I talked until I was blue in the face, but she remained stubbornly silent on why she was breaking up with us. She'd even taken to wearing jeans again. The fun and games were definitely over. I'd run out of options and was feeling desperate, which was why I called in reinforcements. If I couldn't get through to her, I knew who could. I sat in a back booth with the barking dog and saw Emmy walk in with her husbands. I offered a quick wave to them as they remained by the door as Emmy approached. It was an off time, the lunch rush having come and gone, so the place was quiet. So was the jukebox in the corner. When she slid into the booth opposite me, she gave me a pitying smile that told me I looked like shit. I smiled at that because I knew she was right. I looked like shit and I felt worse. "If Rachel found out I was meeting you, she'd kill me," she said. She didn't seem too concerned by her sister's wrath, but I still apologized. "I'm sorry to drag you into this. I just don't know what else to do." She leaned over the table and her smile grew mischievous. "Oh, please. I was ecstatic for an excuse to get out of the house with my men, and my mother has been eager to babysit. Besides, I want to see Rachel happy as much as you do." I let that register. She had worked for us for 2 years, knew Matt and I better than most. "Does that mean you think we could make her happy?" She rolled her eyes. "Are you kidding? I've never seen her happier in her life." Relief had me slumping back in the booth, but her response did nothing to help my confusion. "I thought she was happy too. Do you have any idea why she's doing this?" She bit her lip and toyed with the silverware set out before her. It was clear she was trying to figure out how much she could tell me without breaking her sister's confidence. "You know, don't you?" A little part of me hated myself for putting Emmy in this position, and for invading Rachel's privacy in this way. But if she wasn't willing to talk, what other options did I have? Finally, Emmy blew out a long breath. "All I can tell you is she's not doing this for herself. She thinks it's the right thing to do for you and Matt." I frowned, shook my head. "She said something like that the other day, but it doesn't make sense." I sighed, ran a hand over the back of my neck. "Why?" Emmy's mouth clamped shut. Clearly that was all the info I was getting from Rachel's loyal little sister. I forced a smile. "Thanks, Emmy. I appreciate you meeting me." She reached out a hand and squeezed mine. "I'm rooting for you, Ethan. We all are." I nodded and watched as she walked away to join her husband's by the door. Emmy hadn't told me much, but the fact that Rachel was making us all miserable because she was being noble for some reason was driving me fucking insane. I didn't need her to be noble. I needed her to be ours. I had a very strong suspicion it had to do with Matt and the job offer, that she must have come to the conclusion that she was standing in his way. And if we'd made a baby, then she'd be pretty hefty baggage for Matt. The silly woman didn't understand that she was everything we wanted. I cursed under my breath at Matt, though he wasn't around to hear me. This was his fault, again. That ass was going to ruin the best thing that had ever come our way. If this really was the issue, it would take more than just me to get through to her. Matt needed to talk to her, to reassure her. He was the one who'd put these doubts into her mind, whether he'd intended to or not. When I left the barking dog, I had a plan. Not a hell of a good one, but a plan nonetheless. We couldn't waste any more time. The longer this silence went on, the harder it would be to get through to her and convince her that we were both in this for the long haul. Not because we said we would, but because it was what we wanted. We. I said we when the other half of the we was in fucking California. I was impatient and annoyed. I needed Matt's help, and the only way to get it was to go to him. There was too much at stake here for a fucking voicemail, and my priority had been to get through to Rachel. Yeah, that wasn't working. Now I had to get through to Matt, get him to see how much he risked losing if he pursued this job. I drove out of town with a little more lead in my foot than usual, heading to the ranch to pack and make a flight reservation. When I walked into the kitchen, I stopped short. Matt was there, sitting alone in the dark. Shit, he looked bad, like he hadn't slept in days. Probably as bad as me. He looked up when I came in. Hey, what the hell are you doing here? I didn't try to hide my irritation. What would be the point? It was his fault we were in this mess. I thought you'd be in San Francisco for another couple of days, at least. He nodded. Yeah, that was the plan. Ah, hell. He stared down at his feet, and despite my intentions to remain cold, I felt for him. I'd been there during his recovery from shoulder surgery, from when he had to drop the team, the aftermath. It had destroyed him, losing the dream like that. But he'd come back, found a new dream. Or so I'd thought. You didn't get the job? His head shot up and he looked surprised. Then he scratched the back of his head in a way I knew well. It gave him away every time he was guilty or embarrassed about something. Yeah, about that. I got the job. I grunted because I wasn't happy about it, but it didn't sound like he was either. But I turned it down. In fact, I think I burned that bridge. I got up and walked out, right in the middle of the interview. He summed it up for me quickly, his eyes never meeting mine as he admitted how wrong he'd been. That he'd been blinded by fantasies of dreams he'd long since outgrown. How he'd figured it out sitting in the general manager's office. He sighed. I fucked up. I put my hands on my hips, not understanding him. With the Giants? Huh, yeah. No, with Rachel. When he finally lifted his gaze to mine, I saw he was waiting for me to yell at him. I dropped my arms, exhaled. I didn't have it in me. It was obvious he was beating himself up more than I ever could, and he'd be hating himself even more once I told him how Rachel had called it quits. Yeah, you did. His shoulders slumped. Rachel dumped us. He jerked upright, as if cattle prodded. What? His voice practically shook the walls. He stood, began to pace. What? Why? Why didn't you tell me right away? I would have come back. I would have... Walked away from your dream? I asked quietly. I tried calling you, fucker, but this wasn't something I was going to leave in a message. Besides, how was I supposed to know you'd come to your senses in time and realize what you've got here is pretty great? Better than that. Perfect. I thought of Rachel when she smiled up at me. So open, so trusting. Yeah, we'd fucked up. Well, I had here. He groaned and dropped his head into his hands. This is my fault. Again, damn it. I knew she was fragile, wary of trusting us. Me in particular. I should never have run off like that. Much as I agreed with him, what was past was past. I wanted to punch him in the face, but that wasn't going to solve anything. Yeah, it would make me feel better, but not by much. The only way I'd feel better is if we got Rachel back. Maybe, I replied. But now that you're here, you're the only one who can fix this. I've tried. Trust me. So stop sitting here moaning and come with me to get our woman back.
Rachel. I knew who was knocking on my front door before I even looked through my peephole. It was too late for Emmy to be out paying a visit, and the rest of my siblings would have been in bed an hour ago. Besides, no one in my family ever knocked like they were going to ram the door down if I didn't open. My heart was practically beating out of my chest as I stood there, fingers on the doorknob. I ached to open it, to launch myself in Ethan's arms, but I was also steeling myself for another lecture from him. When the pounding began again, I jumped, then threw the door open. I blinked up in surprise when I nearly collided with Matt, who didn't wait to be asked in. In fact, he picked me up, his hands on my waist, and carried me inside as if I were a package. He put me on my feet and stepped back as Ethan closed the door. Both men looked at me, and while it was my house and they just barged in, I nearly burst into tears right then and there. It had been torture turning Ethan away again and again. Those talks had sapped every ounce of my willpower and energy, and it had been so hard to not change my mind. I wanted to be with them, but I also didn't want to hold them back. I loved them too much for that. It wasn't just Ethan standing before me now, but Matt too. He looked as weary as I felt, but I saw intent in his gaze as he focused it squarely on me. Shit. I had no idea how I could remain strong with both of them in my living room and looking so stubborn and determined. I wrapped my arms around myself, wishing I had on clothes appropriate for doing battle. My comfy cotton tank top and shorts that I wore to bed didn't exactly lend me an air of cold reserve. Sure enough, I watched Matt's gaze move over my thighs that the shorts did nothing to hide. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed fixated on my breasts. Even though I'd crossed my arms, I was absolutely certain they could both see I wasn't wearing a bra. I shifted from one foot to the other, trying to ignore the heat coursing through at their possessive perusal, like they owned this body and had every right to look and touch. And they did own it. They'd claimed me body and soul. I would always be theirs. But they wouldn't be mine. That thought had me looking away, glancing down at my hot pink toenails. I had to remind myself of that over and over. It was the only thing keeping me from selfishly running back to them and letting them take care of me and this baby, rather than focusing on their own lives, their own dreams, which didn't include me. Matt moved closer, his long, lean body tense and powerful as he approached, a predator stalking his prey. He dropped his hat on the coffee table beside me. I noticed the whiskers on his jaw, the tired lines on his face. I swallowed and tried to move away, but the backs of my legs collided with my couch. "What's this I hear about you ending our relationship?" he growled. Oh shit. If my men ever pulled the good cop, bad cop routine, Matt would be the bad cop every single time. The ridiculous part was, even as I swallowed down my nerves, my shorts grew wet and my nipples hardened. I'd always been a sucker for his bossy voice, and he knew it. I licked my lips. I might have been going crazy for wanting these men, but one glance at the front of their jeans and it was clear the feeling was mutual. They wanted me just as much as I wanted them. I shook my head. Desire had never been the issue between the three of us. Attraction and passion we had in spades, in butt plugs and spankings. But desire didn't equal commitment. "I think it's for the best," I said, for what must have been the 100th time. Before I could go on with the rest of my spiel, Matt interrupted. "Tell me why." "Having a baby is a big commitment. I can't ask you guys to—" "Nobody's asking," Ethan said. He paced my living room looking like a caged animal. I knew he was frustrated. He'd been trying to win me back for days, but I knew he was only doing it because of the verbal commitment he'd made and the responsibility he felt toward me.
He's right, Matt added. You're not asking us to commit to you. We made that choice the moment we met you.
I tried to stay quiet, but the words finally came out. Yes, but you made a mistake. It's okay to admit that. They both gaped at me with open mouths and wide eyes like I'd just declared that I was a ninja or something.
Are you serious?
Ethan asked as he shifted his stance. Matt made a growling sound as he ran his hands through his hair.
This is all my fault. I never should have gone to that interview.
I bit back a sigh, suddenly tired from the effort it took to remain strong. It's not your fault, Matt. I'm happy for you, I really am. You have a dream and you should pursue it. You're going to do great in San Francisco. When he lifted his head, his eyes met mine and I froze at the depth of his emotions. He reached out to me and tugged me up against him. I felt every hard line of his body.
You're my dream, Rachel. You and the family that we're working on creating.
I shook my head against the tempting words. Oh, how wonderful life would be if I could truly believe him. You think you have to say that because...
I don't have to say anything.
Frustration had him glaring down at me, and I felt Ethan's presence close at my side. Felt the heat of him. I was surrounded by them, overpowered by their size and intensity.
Damn it, Rachel, listen to us,
Ethan said.
We're not here because we feel a sense of responsibility towards you. We do, of course, but not in the way you think. You think you're a burden to us? Am I right?
Matt asked. Some of the sternness had left his voice, and he sounded surprisingly gentle. His hand still gripped my upper arms, his thumbs sliding back and forth over my bare skin. I nodded. There was no way I could lie to them when they were so close and so overwhelming. He sighed, and I could see the regret in his eyes.
I'm so sorry if I ever made you feel that way.
I bit my lip, unsure of what to say. He hadn't denied it. If I had a baby, you'd always have to sacrifice your career dreams for me, for us. He pushed a lock of hair out of my face and cupped my chin in his hand, forcing me to meet his gaze.
I was wrong to leave like that, Rachel, but it won't happen again.
I opened my mouth to protest, but he continued before I could.
I won't be leaving. I turned down the job, not because of you, but because of me.
He scowled down at me, his eyes darkening with emotion.
I never want to be away from you and Ethan and any family we make, not for any length of time, and not for a coaching job.
If I weren't here, you wouldn't be saying that. My voice sounded small, but it was the last protest I could come up with. I was losing my strength to fight them, and a little part of me was starting to hear what he was saying, what Ethan had been saying all along. He gave me a lopsided grin, as though he could sense my weakening.
Maybe you're right,
he said.
Maybe if you hadn't come along, I would have run off to San Francisco and lived out my dream of working in the majors again.
The air rushed from my lungs at him, admitting that I had a point. But then he continued, his thumb pressing more firmly into my chin, as if to ensure I was paying attention.
But you did come along. And the moment you walked into my life, my dreams changed. Does a life in baseball hold some appeal? Yes, of course it does. But it pales in comparison to this new reality I've been given, one with you in it. Hell, in the damn center of it, in which I'd be lucky enough to have a family of my own, a wife and hopefully kids.
Tears stung the backs of my eyes at his words.
Life changes, he said. Time makes us move forward and grow up. You should know that as well as anyone. You reached a point where you realized that your dream family wouldn't come in the way you'd imagined it, and decided to do something about it.
I blinked up at him. That was true. My childish fantasies of how I'd meet a man and start a family had taken a turn the moment I'd been assaulted in college and couldn't be intimate. I'd had to change my dream to fit the new me, which had meant heading to a sperm bank, and who could have predicted that a sperm bank was where these two would profess their love? He pulled me tighter until my breasts were crushed against his chest. So yeah, maybe in another life I would have taken that job, but now that I have you, I couldn't imagine a better life than the one I have right here, right now. Wow. Just wow. If I'd had any doubts about his honesty, they were dashed by the look in his eyes. The truth of his words was there, shown plainly for me to see. I heard Ethan move beside me. So, he asked, what do you say, Rachel? Will you give us another chance to be a family? My heart threatened to leap out of my chest. I never knew it could feel so good to admit defeat, but they'd broken through the last of my walls and there was no turning back. Shifting slightly so I could see them both, I smiled up at my men. I definitely want to be a part of this family. I glanced down at my belly. But you should know that our little family is about to grow, sooner than you might think. Both of them stared at me, trying to understand my words. Ethan broke the silence first. Wait, are you saying? Are you? Holy shit! I'd never seen Matt go speechless before, and I took a second to marvel at the sight. I couldn't help but smile. When it seemed like they couldn't take the suspense any longer, I gave in and nodded. They broke out in grins and whooped with happiness. Matt picked me up and spun me about, then carefully set me back down, obviously afraid he might have scrambled the baby. He put a hand on my flat belly. We're going to have a baby. When you two apply yourself to a task, you certainly give it your all. Chapter 13. Matt. I usually had something to say, always a witty comeback of some kind. But Rachel? Yeah, she shut me up. Not only did I have no words, but my brain wasn't functioning. She was pregnant. Holy fuck, she was having our baby. I was going to be a father. And so I just stared at her, mouth open, eyes wide, heart beating frantically, and oddly enough, my dick was as hard as a rock. I felt very virile, very manly, like a fucking caveman. My little swimmers were strong and they'd gotten our girl knocked up. I glanced at Ethan and his face had a similar expression to mine. Yeah, it could have been his mighty sperm, but I didn't care. Our woman was having our baby. How long have you known? Ethan asked, stroking a knuckle over her cheek. She looked down, saw my hand on her belly. It was still flat, and yet I imagined it growing round soon enough. That's why you did all this, he added, his voice softer. You knew and didn't want to keep Matt from his dream job. I stepped back then, yanking my hand away as if the baby just zapped me. Is that true? I asked. Shit. She had broken up with us so I could go after what I want unimpeded. She'd known she was pregnant and was willing to go it alone for my happiness. I ran my hand over my hair. She gave a slight nod. I love you. The words fell out of my mouth and I was just as stunned as Rachel looked. Not stunned at the feeling, because it was true, but because I hadn't said it before now. If I had, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe my brain and my heart would have been in sync and I would have told the giants no before I even got on that damn plane. Ethan smiled. We haven't told you that, have we? Rachel looked between the two of us, clearly surprised. No. Maybe that's the problem. We made it clear you belonged to us.
that we wanted a baby with you. Even told you we wanted forever. But we never told you why."
"Oh,"
she whispered. "I think it was love at first sight." A laugh escaped her lips, and I had to grin. "Yeah, I know, it's crazy, me saying something as romantic as that." I stepped forward, hooked my hand about her waist and pulled her to me, felt every soft curve, heard the gasp that escaped, breathed in her sweet scent. "It's true. You might be Emmy's sister and our office manager, but you were ours before we even knew your name," Ethan admitted. "And the baby? I'm thrilled." He grinned then, in a blinding sort of way, and I knew that feeling. I felt it too. A smile, though, wasn't enough to show her how we felt about her, about the baby she was making, the family she was creating inside of her. "I love you, Rachel Andrews," Ethan said. His smile had slipped, and he looked at her with a sweet seriousness, with reverence. "Do you believe us, baby?" I asked. "Do you believe me when I say you're what I want? This baby is everything." She nodded. I love you too." She was like a boxer hitting me with a 1-2 punch combination. A baby and the 3 words I hadn't realized I longed to hear. "It's time we showed you how much we love you, don't you think?" Ethan asked. Rachel looked at him, arched a brow. "Oh? How's that?" He bent at the waist, picked her up and tossed her over his shoulder.
"Ethan!"
She squealed as he carried her to her bedroom. "Careful, the baby!" I said, suddenly panicked. Ethan put her down on her feet directly in front of the bed. It wasn't big enough for all 3 of us to sleep in, but we'd remedy that situation later. After we made love to her and showed her how perfect she was. She wouldn't sleep here, but in the cabin we had built for her and all the baby she was going to make for us. But now, it was time to get her naked and worship every inch of her. "Wearing panties beneath those little pajama shorts?" Ethan asked. She looked up at both of us, bit her lip, then shook her head. "Good girl," I told her. "Take them off."
"Rachel." I took a second to process everything. They loved me, and they were ready to fuck me. I couldn't miss their hard cocks pressing against the fronts of their jeans. I couldn't miss the earnestness on their faces, the truth of their words. They loved me. They loved me. For several days I had felt as if my world was ending, as if it had imploded and gravity had been sucked away. Now, God, I was practically giddy with love, but they must have mistaken my quiet for apprehension.
"Are we pushing you too much? Are you feeling all right? Should I not have tossed you over my shoulder? Can we have sex with a baby in there? What happens if we hit it with our big dicks?"
Okay. I laughed at that one and shimmied out of my short shorts as I did so. "No, yes, yes, toss. Yes and no. You won't hit the baby with your big dicks." Both of them were staring at my pussy and probably didn't hear any of my answers.
"Holy shit, baby, you're gorgeous. That little tank top does nothing to hide those perfect tits." "Yeah, they seem bigger," Ethan added.
I felt small, like an animal about to be pounced on. My already hard nipples ached at their words. "I think they are bigger," I replied. "And sensitive." Ethan arched a dark brow, reached out and tugged up the hem of the tank top until I had to lift my arms over my head so we could take it off. They each cupped one of my breasts in their palms. Matt grunted and Ethan groaned.
"They are bigger,"
Matt murmured. He dropped to his knees and took a nipple into his mouth, sucked on it gently. I cried out, and my eyes fell closed in instant pleasure. They had been sore, and the nipples were definitely more sensitive than usual. And with Matt's mouth on me? Oh, yes. I felt a second mouth on my other nipple and realized Ethan bent at the waist and labbed. I tangled my fingers in their hair, tugged them closer. I bit my lip to stifle all the sounds I was making. I couldn't help it. They knew just what to do to get me off. Their hands began to roam, and when one of them cupped my pussy, my knees buckled. I was swept up into Ethan's arms and placed on the bed. They began to strip, and Ethan said,
"We should spank you for torturing us all, but we'll have to talk to the doctor first."
The words had me blushing. "You will not," I countered. "We are not asking the doctor if you can spank me." Matt was naked first, and his cock was as gloriously thick and long as I remembered.
"Oh, yes, we are. I'm only going to curtail our play if it's not safe for the baby, and there's no way I'm waiting 9 months to put pink handprints on your gorgeous backside."
Reaching out, he grabbed one ankle and flipped me onto my belly. I gasped, but when he placed his hand on my butt and gave it a squeeze, I moaned.
"I've heard pregnant women are horny. Is this true for you?"
Matt asked, hooking a hand around my waist and tugging me up to my hands and knees. Ethan moved to sit at the head of the bed. Naked, his cock stood proudly up from his body. I licked my lips at the sight. Why had I denied myself for so many days? I was horny. I wasn't sure if it was because I was pregnant or not. It seemed I was insatiable around these two no matter what. "It's you two who make me horny," I countered, wiggling my hips. Matt's fingers slid over my folds.
"So wet,"
he said. When he slipped 2 fingers into me, I arched my back.
"Do you need to be fucked, baby?"
I nodded, bit my lip.
"We'll take care of you,"
Matt reassured me. Ethan curled a finger.
"Come over here and suck me off, sweetheart, while Matt fucks that perfect pussy."
My mouth watered, eager for Ethan's cock. A pearly drop of fluid seeped from the tip, and I crawled closer, flicked my tongue over it. His hand curled in my hair, and I felt powerful. The bed dipped behind me, and Matt began to fuck me with his fingers. In, out, slow and careful. I gripped the base of Ethan's cock as I worked him in and out of my mouth. He was too big to take all the way, but the sounds he made proved he was more than happy with what I was doing. But when Matt pulled his fingers from me, I lifted off Ethan's cock and looked over my shoulder. Matt's gaze was heated, his jaw tense, his cock almost angry-looking with its need.
"I love you, Rachel Andrews."
I watched as he shifted his hips, aligned himself, and thrust deep. A hand went to my hip to hold me in place, but I wasn't going anywhere. In fact, I pushed back to take him even deeper. His eyes fell closed as he gave himself over to the pleasure. Just as before, it made me feel so damn powerful, that I could turn Matt completely brainless, that he could find perfect pleasure in my body, just as I did with him. Ethan's hands tugged in the long strands of my hair, and I glanced up at him through my lashes. He was just as overcome. I opened my mouth and took him back inside, licked and swirled, sucked and flicked as Matt fucked me. I was just where I wanted, between my 2 men. I loved this. I loved them. When Matt's thumb slipped over my back entrance, I startled. And when he used some of my juices to coat that still virgin hole and press in, I groaned around Ethan's cock.
"Shit, I'm gonna come from that."
Ethan lifted me off of him. Matt pulled out and I was suddenly empty. Guys? What were they doing? We weren't done. I hadn't come. No, they'd only worked me up to the point where I was ready to reach between my legs and do it for myself.
"You bring us together, Rachel. You make us a family. You make us a unit," Ethan said. "It's time to take you together, to make you officially ours," Matt added.
His thumb was still pressing and circling into my ass. I pushed up onto my hands and Matt pulled from me. My skin was damp with sweat, every nerve ending tingling and eager for them. Yes, I wanted this. I wanted more of them.
"Shit, I don't have any lube," Matt grumbled.
I sat back on my heels between them. They looked disappointed yet determined.
"Like to do any baking, sweetheart?" Ethan asked.
I frowned, completely confused by his change of topic.
"Got any coconut oil in your cupboard?"
I nodded, more because I knew it was there than I knew why he was asking. He hopped up, went into the kitchen stark naked. Before I could ask Matt what was going on, he pulled me to him for a kiss, one of his arms wrapping about my waist, the other cupping the back of my head. His tongue met mine, drove me wild.
I'm so sorry, baby. I love you. I won't leave you again. This baby, this life, it's everything I've ever wanted but never knew I needed.
Ethan came back in the room as I nodded my head. I believed Matt, believed in his commitment, his love. Ethan moved behind me on the bed, showed me a small bowl with a white lump of coconut oil in it.
Bet you never thought you'd use it for this.
He sat it on the bed out of the way, scooped some into his hand, rubbed his palms together so it melted and glistened before he slid his fingers between my thighs.
Wider,
he said, the slick feel of the coconut oil coating my pussy. He reached for more, did it again, then slid his fingers to coat my back entrance, then press in. Matt held me in his arms, lowered his head and kissed me again as Ethan began to work a finger into me, collecting more coconut oil as he went. I groaned when the single digit slid in and out, fucking me as I knew his big cock would soon enough. I still kissed Matt as Ethan tended to me, but when he replaced one finger with two, I couldn't continue. I was panting, adjusting to his gentle insistence. Matt settled back on his heels and pulled me up so I was straddling him.
Down you go,
he said, slowly working me down and onto his cock. We were face to face, our bodies pressed together as I took him into me all the way. Ethan had stilled his two fingers inside of me as I settled onto Matt's lap, his cock completely filling me. But once I settled my thighs against Matt's, Ethan began to move, working his fingers and fucking me there. Oh, God, I breathed. It was intense. I stared at Matt, our eyes holding. He was watching me, taking in every one of my reactions. I lifted my hand, stroked over his face, his hair. I love you. He grinned, then angled his hips. My eyes widened as the motion rubbed my clit against him. Again, I breathed. He complied, then once more. Oh my, I'm going to come. I was, just from Matt deep inside me and Ethan's play. It wasn't an intense orgasm, but a rolling one, heating me and sinking me into the pleasure that only they could give me. A little cry escaped my throat, and my fingers gripped Matt's neck and shoulder. More, I breathed when it finally waned. They moved then. I wasn't paying much attention, for I was still needy, still eager for more. I liked when they pounded into me, almost used me for their pleasure. They hadn't done that, and I needed it. I needed it, and the way it would make me come. When I opened my eyes, Matt was flat on his back, knees bent and his lower legs hanging off the edge of the bed as I straddled him. Ethan was standing at the edge, his hand on the mattress beside me as he leaned over me. Matt was still buried deep.
Time to move, baby,
Matt said, using his hands on my hips to lift and lower me slowly. I kept the pace as Ethan's fingers returned for just a moment. Then I felt something bigger, broader, his cock.
Ride Matt while I fuck your ass,
Ethan said, pressing carefully against me, trying to work me open. He'd prepared me well. The coconut oil was slick and he'd been generous with it.
That's it. Open for me. Deep breath, let it out. Good girl,
he said. I cried out when he was able to push into me. I knew it had been a fight, my body resisting even when I tried not to. Matt's eyes widened and I stared at him, knowing for the first time they were claiming me, together.
So good, baby. Perfect,
he whispered. His eyes fell closed as I swirled my hips, took him deep. His hands gripped me then, holding me still.
Time for your men to fuck you,
he said, pulling back then thrusting deep. I cried out as Ethan did the opposite. As Matt was deep, Ethan's cock retreated, so they were alternating their motions, one of them always fucking me. My hands gripped the comforter by Matt's shoulders, and I arched my back. It was too much. They were too much. I can't. It's...
Come, Rachel. Come all over your men.
Ethan's words pushed me to the brink and over. Having both of them in me, fucking me, was nothing I'd ever felt before, and I succumbed. Sank submitted, loved. Yes! I cried, my inner walls clenching and squeezing them, trying to take their seed. We'd already made the baby, but my body wanted more of them, their very essence. Ethan came first, shouting my name as he thrust deep in my ass, held himself still. His ragged breathing filled the room as he moved back, carefully pulled out. I felt his seed slip from me as Matt pushed me so I was sitting upright. He then gripped my hips, lifted and lowered me as he wanted. I pushed down, taking him for a ride until he too came. I felt him swell then fill me as he held on. I grinned down at him, thrilled with myself that I'd taken both of them, that I'd been able to come myself, but even more, that I'd pleased them. "Who's the best rider in the family now?" I asked, a teasing lilt to my voice. Matt grinned, lifted me off him and onto the bed beside him. Ethan went to the bathroom to clean up, then tucked down the other side. "You. Definitely you," Ethan whispered, kissing my shoulder. That's right. Matt only stayed on for 8 seconds. I stayed on for much longer than that. Matt rolled so he was half over me. "Yeah, but can you go again and again?" I looked at him, then Ethan. They were looking down at me, smiles on their faces. Ethan's palms settled on my belly. "All night," I told them. "That's all?" Ethan asked. "How about forever?" I grinned, stroked their faces. Yes, these men were mine, all mine. Yes, forever. This has been Hold Me Close, a Bridgewater County Book 4, written by Vanessa Vale, narrated by Kylie Stewart. Copyright 2017 by Vanessa Vale. Production copyright 2017 by Vanessa Vale.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.